Would you press a button that erases your worst memory? You know exactly which one it is. It arrives uninvited, during quiet moments, when you're trying to fall asleep, when the day has been too still. A memory that doesn't just replay, but pulls. A moment that changed you in ways no one else can see. That thing you did or didn't do. That look someone gave you. That night, that truth. And if I told you that all of it could disappear completely, would you want that? A button, that's all. One press, and it's gone. The memory, the feeling, the weight, like it never happened. You'd wake up lighter. You wouldn't even remember what you forgot. It would simply vanish, leaving behind only peace. But something inside you resists. A strange unease, like the memory itself is a part of you. A part you hate, but also one you don't know how to lose. You try to imagine it. The version of yourself that never remembers that moment. Would you smile more? Would you be less afraid? Would you finally sleep without clenching your jaw? But then something harder surfaces. A quiet question that doesn't go away. Who would you be without that memory? You've built so much around it. Your caution, your empathy, your fear, your guilt. The way you speak, the way you apologize too quickly, the way you don't trust easily anymore. It's all shaped by what happened. That moment has changed how you love, how you protect yourself, how you see other people. You think you hate it, but you've used it to survive. Without it, would you repeat the same mistake? Would you walk straight into harm again, not knowing what to avoid? Would the person who hurt you still feel safe in your mind? Would you still believe in something that should have broken long ago? You start to realize the memory isn't just pain, it's instruction, warning, armor. Even if you'd never choose it again, it has taught you things you now live by. To remove it might mean removing the only reason you know better now. But maybe the real issue isn't the memory itself. It's the shame, the helplessness, the silence around it. What you never said, what no one else saw, what you blamed yourself for, even when it wasn't your fault. You don't want to remember it because it reminds you of how little control you had. And maybe you hate that part most of all. So maybe pressing the button isn't about forgetting the memory. Maybe it's about escaping who you were in that moment. Weak, neshiv, powerless. You tell yourself you're past it, but the truth is, part of you still lives there. And the button tempts you, not because it erases the past, but because it promises you were never that person at all. And yet, there's another layer. What if someone else was involved? What if forgetting means forgetting what they did? What if erasing your memory erases their responsibility, their guilt? Would you be setting them free? Would you let someone escape what they did, just so you could feel better? Or maybe you're the one who caused the memory, and you tell yourself it's your punishment to carry it. You think that pressing the button would be selfish. That forgetting means excusing yourself. And some part of you believes you don't deserve that kind of peace. You think you need to remember, to keep yourself accountable, to never let yourself become that person again. But now you're caught in something more complicated. You realize the button doesn't just erase a memory, it rewrites who you are, quietly, permanently. It reshapes what you've learned, what you've endured, what you've survived. And what if someone else loves the version of you that came from that memory? The version that's a little more careful, a little more kind, a little more understanding of pain. Would they even recognize you after the memory is gone? Would you? Because now it's not just about relief. It's about identity, about continuity, about whether we can cut out parts of our story and still expect the whole to hold together. And maybe most painfully, you realize something else. You don't want to forget. You want it not to have happened. But the button can't give you that. It can't undo the damage. It can only hide it. And some part of you knows that forgetting doesn't mean healing. It just means silence. And maybe silence isn't the same thing as peace. You're left with the question again. Press the button, or don't. But now, even that question has changed. Because it's no longer about whether you can forget. It's about whether you want to stop remembering who you became because of it. And whether the version of you without that memory is someone you'd actually want to be. And maybe in the end, you still want to press it. Maybe you don't. But either way, the choice doesn't erase the past. It only erases your ability to understand why you feel the way you do when the world is quiet again. Would you help someone you love hide a body? Not in theory, not as a hypothetical. Picture it clearly. It's 2 a.m. There's a knock at the door. They're shaking, covered in blood. They look you in the eye and say one thing. I didn't mean to, but it's done. I need your help. No explanation, no time. Just the weight of those words pressing down on both of you. You know what they're asking, and they don't say it out loud, but you know they mean it completely. They're not asking for your opinion or your forgiveness. They're asking for your loyalty, and in that moment, your love for them becomes something dangerous. It's no longer soft or beautiful or reassuring. It's something sharp, something that cuts. You start to realize that love can pull you into places you never thought you'd go, not because you stop knowing what's right, but because you're no longer willing to care. Would you help them move the body? Would you wipe away the blood? Would you tell no one, carry the weight silently, and become something else, something colder, quieter, less honest? It's easy to say no when you're far from the moment, when everything is hypothetical and clean. But when it's real, when they're standing in front of you, terrified and trembling and desperate, you don't think in principles, you think in seconds, you think in steps. What to do next? What needs to be done? You might tell yourself you're helping them because it was an accident, because they're not a killer, not really. You tell yourself you're protecting them from a system that won't understand, from a punishment they don't deserve. But that's not the truth. Not all of it. The deeper truth is harder to admit. You're doing it because you love them more than you love justice, more than you love the truth. You're doing it because their safety, their peace of mind, their survival matters more to you than someone else's pain. You'd rather become a liar, an accomplice, than watch them suffer. You'd rather be guilty together than innocent alone. And that's the part you never say out loud, the part you keep buried, that when it came down to it, you chose them, not because it was right, but because it was them. Now ask yourself something harder. What if it wasn't an accident? What if, deep down, you suspect they meant to do it? What if the person they killed wasn't a threat, but just someone they hated? Would you still help? Would your hands still move to clean up the mess? Maybe you'd start asking questions. Maybe you'd pull away, but maybe not. Maybe your love has already passed the point of no return. Maybe it's already stronger than your doubt. Maybe you'd help even then. Not because you approve, but because you're already in too deep to back out. Because you've already become the kind of person who helps. And then it changes you. Slowly, quietly, permanently. You start living with a secret you can never speak aloud. You start wondering if they're who you thought they were. You start wondering if you are. Every time they smile, every time they laugh, every time they act like nothing happened, you feel it, that quiet disconnect, that invisible fracture. And you don't know if it's them you're afraid of, or yourself. You find yourself watching them differently, listening for hesitation, trying to read between every word. Because now you're not just their partner, or their friend, or their soulmate. You're their accomplice. And that changes everything. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unfeel what you felt. And no matter how close you remain, something between you is lost. Because love that requires silence always comes with a cost. And maybe one day you'll look at them and wonder if they'd do the same for you. If the roles were reversed, if you came to them covered in blood, shaking, desperate, would they help you? Would they bury the truth beside the body, or would they turn away? You realize you don't know, you never did, and now you live with both answers at once. The one where you'd do anything for them, and the one where you're not sure they'd do the same. You live with the weight of a crime you didn't commit, and a loyalty that turned into guilt, and you never speak of it again, because the worst part isn't what they did, it's what you were willing to do for them. Have you ever wondered if your closest friend feels a small, quiet joy when you fail? Not the kind of joy they'd ever admit. Not even to themselves, but something subtle. A flicker of satisfaction, so quick they barely register it. You're struggling, hurting, doubting yourself, and they're right there beside you, offering comfort. But somewhere underneath, something else is happening. Something colder. You think back to moments when things went wrong for you. Not catastrophic things, just enough to knock you down a little. A breakup, a rejection, a missed opportunity. You remember the look in their eyes, the way they consoled you, nodded slowly, told you it wasn't your fault. You believed them. You needed to believe them. But what if, for just a second, they felt better about themselves because you were worse off? Maybe they didn't mean to. Maybe it just slipped through. An instinct, a reflex. The way people feel when they realize they're not the only ones lost, insecure, afraid. There's comfort in shared failure, in not being the only one who's struggling. And when you're usually the one who seems strong, competent ahead, it can become unbearable for them to watch. So they wait. Not consciously, not with malice, but with a kind of quiet anticipation. Waiting for life to remind you that you're not untouchable, that you fall too. And when it happens, part of them relaxes, part of them feels balance restored. Not because they hate you, but because they need you not to be perfect. You start to think about the times you succeeded, really succeeded, when you were proud of yourself, excited, energized. Did they seem off, distracted? Were they there but not fully? Did they congratulate you a little too late, or not at all? Did they change the subject quickly? You told yourself it was nothing. You always tell yourself that. But now you're replaying those moments with a new lens. Not to accuse them, but to understand the subtle discomfort they might have felt. That unease when you're shining too brightly, because your light casts shadows. And sometimes the people closest to you end up standing in them. And still, they love you. They do. That's what makes it harder. This isn't about enemies. This is about someone who cares about you, who laughs with you, shares your memories, protects your secrets. And yet, deep down, they may need your failure to believe they're okay, to believe they're enough. You think about the times they struggled, when they were lost and you were steady. When they doubted themselves and you didn't. When they confessed fears and you listened with calm, unwavering confidence. They admired you. But admiration curdles into resentment when it's not reciprocated, when it makes them feel lesser. So they watch, quietly, and they wait. Not for you to collapse, but for your edges to soften. For the illusion of your strength to crack. Just enough for them to breathe easier. And when it happens, they don't celebrate. They comfort you, sincerely. They check in, they bring food, they sit with you, and it's real. But so is the small, unspoken relief. You begin to see how thin the line is between love and comparison, between closeness and competition. No one talks about this. No one wants to admit that sometimes the people we love most are also measuring themselves against us. Not because they're cruel, because they're scared, because they're trying to survive their own doubt. And maybe you've done it too. Maybe you've watched someone else rise and felt that pang of envy. Maybe you felt a quiet peace when their luck ran out. Not proud of it, just aware of it. Maybe this isn't just about your friend. Maybe it's about something more uncomfortable. Maybe the real question isn't whether your best friend is secretly happier when you fail, but whether you could ever completely blame them if they were. Because the truth is, intimacy doesn't erase insecurity. Love doesn't eliminate comparison, and friendship doesn't make us immune to envy. It just makes us better at hiding it. And now you're left wondering how many of your shared smiles, shared victories, shared griefs were also shared distortions. How much of what you thought was pure was quietly laced with something else. And whether you'll ever be able to look at them the same way again. Would you do it? Would you press your hands against his back, feel the warmth of his skin through his shirt, and push just hard enough to send him over the edge? His body would fall, land on the tracks below, and the train would stop. 5 lives would be saved. He would die, and you would be the reason. It's not a riddle, not a hypothetical. Not anymore. This is the moment. The man is here. The train is coming. The 5 people tied to the tracks are real, screaming. The seconds are vanishing. And no one else can act. You can already feel the sickness rising. Not because the math is unclear. It isn't. 1 life versus 5. The logic is sound. But standing this close to the man, feeling the weight of the decision press into your chest, it's different. You aren't making a calculation. You're preparing for violence. You tell yourself you're not a killer. You've never hurt anyone. You aren't that kind of person. But if you don't push him, they die. All 5 of them. Their deaths will be on your hands too. Not because you killed them, but because you could have stopped it, and didn't. Still, the thought of acting feels unbearable. The push would be quick, but the moment after would last forever. You'd never forget the look in his eyes as he turned, realizing what you were doing. The betrayal, the confusion. He has no idea what's coming. He's just standing there, existing, trusting the world not to harm him. And you would be the one to shatter that trust. You try to find another way. You search your surroundings. Look for options. There are none. No lever, no emergency brake, no warning system, just you, the man, the bridge, and the train. You want to believe that not acting is neutral, that standing still is morally cleaner than taking a life. But it isn't. It's just quieter, easier to explain to yourself. You didn't kill anyone, you'll say. You just couldn't do it. You weren't strong enough. You weren't ready. But none of that changes the result. 5 people will die. And here's the part that hurts. Maybe you're not trying to be moral. Maybe you're just trying to stay innocent, to keep your hands clean, to avoid the guilt that would come from pushing him. But guilt doesn't vanish when you stand still. It just changes shape. You imagine explaining this to someone afterward, telling them you watched their daughter die, their husband, their friend, because you couldn't bring yourself to push a stranger. Could you look them in the eye? Could you tell them it was the right decision? You want there to be a correct answer. You want morality to guide you like a compass. But now you see that morality doesn't function here. It's collapsed under the weight of this decision. Every choice is tainted. Every outcome carries blood. There is no version of this where you walk away unchanged. And then for a moment, you consider what it would be like to be the man on the bridge, to be the one pushed, to be sacrificed without knowing why. Would you forgive the person who did it? Would you want to? You don't know. You imagine the sound his body would make when it hits the track, the silence after, the way the train would stop, The 5 people screaming, realizing they're alive because someone else isn't. Would they even know what happened? Would they understand what you did for them? Would they thank you? Or would you always carry this moment alone? You wonder if that's the real punishment. Not the act itself, but the solitude of knowing what you are capable of living the rest of your life with that final shove in your memory. Waking up in the middle of the night, feeling the ghost of his back against your palms. Remembering the exact weight of his life. But maybe the deeper fear isn't what happens if you push him. Maybe the deeper fear is what it says about you if you don't. That your sense of morality was never about protecting others. That it was always about protecting your self-image. That in the face of suffering, your instinct was not to save, but to protect yourself. And if that's true, then maybe you've already lost something more important than innocence. Maybe you've lost the illusion that you were ever the kind of person who would do the hard thing if it really came down to it. And now the train is closer. The screams are louder. The man is still beside you, and you're still frozen. If torture worked every time, if it never failed, would you legalize it? Not as a last resort, not in secret, but as an open, accepted practice of justice. Would you pass the law yourself? Vote for it. Watch it happen. Imagine someone has hidden a bomb in a crowded building. Hundreds of lives are at risk. Time is slipping away. The suspect is in custody. You know he has the information, and you know that if you begin torturing him, he will break. Without delay. No resistance, no false leads, just the truth. Quickly, clearly, completely. Every time. What would stop you? You might say that torture is inhumane, that it reduces people to tools, to meat. But if the outcome is guaranteed, if innocent lives are saved with certainty, does that matter? You might believe in due process, in rights that can't be violated. But what is the value of those rights when children are moments from dying? What is the worth of principle against the weight of preventable death? If every instance of torture resulted in lives saved, pain prevented, families preserved, what would be your justification for refusing it? Would it be morality? Would it be your sense of dignity? Or would it just be your fear of becoming someone you don't recognize? Maybe that's the real question. Not whether torture works, but what it does to the person who uses it. Not the pain inflicted, but the transformation of the one inflicting it. Because if it worked every time, then the only thing stopping you is you. Not logic, not doubt, just your own image of yourself. You don't want to be someone who tortures, even if it saves lives, even if it always works. You want to believe there's a line you won't cross. No matter what, you want to believe in clean hands. But hands don't stay clean when others are dying. Not when you could stop it. Not when the solution is right in front of you, waiting for your permission. Would you really say no? Would you really let them die to protect your image of who you are? Now imagine the law passes. Torture becomes legal. Only in rare cases, only with strict oversight. Every time it's used, it works, without exception. The policy saves thousands of lives. Every year. How long before it's used more often? Before it's no longer just about bombs, but about gangs, or kidnappers, or organized crime. What begins as rare becomes routine. What begins as desperate becomes efficient. And now you're watching a man scream behind a one-way mirror. You're told he's guilty, that lives are at stake, that the information he gives could prevent something worse. You nod, you accept it, you turn away. But what if he isn't guilty? What if this is the first failure, the first time it doesn't work? You justified the practice because it never failed. But now the damage is already done. The pain already inflicted. the screams already heard, and they meant nothing. What does that do to your certainty? Would you stop the policy after one mistake? What about 10? What about 100? You tell yourself it's worth it, that on balance, lives are still being saved, but something begins to change. The line you once refused to cross has been blurred for so long, you don't remember where it was. You used to say you were against torture, that it was wrong, that it was beneath you. But now you're calculating, weighing bodies, counting screams. Maybe you don't even notice it happening. Maybe the shift is too slow to see. But one day you realize you haven't thought about the pain in a long time. You haven't asked if it's justified. You just trust the system. You trust the result, and that scares you. Because the real question was never whether torture works. It was whether you were willing to live in a world where it becomes normal, where it becomes expected, where it becomes invisible. And now that world is here, and you built it, thought by thought, choice by choice. You built it the moment you decided that outcome mattered more than method, that pain was acceptable if it delivered truth. You built it the moment you told yourself that saving lives justified anything. And now you can't remember who you were before that decision. Maybe the reason torture was outlawed wasn't because it never worked, but because of what it always changed. Not the suspect, not the outcome, but you. Every time you sleep, a part of you dies. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Literally, you close your eyes and something disappears. You just don't notice. You never do. The mind that wakes up isn't exactly the one that went to sleep. Not entirely. It remembers enough to pretend continuity. It speaks in the same voice, inhabits the same body, picks up the same routines. But it's slightly different. A little less vivid, a little less connected. Something faded in the transition, something important. Sleep isn't just rest, it's erasure. It's silence, swallowing the details you forgot to protect. Tiny moments, stray thoughts, quiet realizations, gone. People you've dreamed about, conversations you never spoke, memories real enough to feel true, yet now unreachable. Every night, a quiet reset. Every morning, a subtle distortion. You think of sleep as healing, but maybe that's only because you don't remember what it takes from you. You wake up feeling better, lighter, calmer. But what if that's because the version of you that carried the burden is no longer here? What if the pain didn't fade? It simply belonged to someone else, and that someone is gone now. You might insist it's still you, that you're the same person as yesterday. But try remembering the precise thoughts you had before falling asleep last night. Not vague impressions, exact words, exact feelings. You can't. Those thoughts existed. You experienced them. But now they're gone. Lost. You've moved on without them, because you had no choice. Each time you sleep, you're trusting that what returns is close enough, that the loss is acceptable, that the fragments discarded weren't essential. But how would you know? If the things you forget are the very parts that would have told you what's missing, what else could you lose without noticing? And what about dreams? Strange, shifting stories that make perfect sense while they're happening, then disintegrate on contact with waking. Where do they go? You might wake up startled, disturbed, sure that something meaningful happened. But within seconds, it's gone. Like your mind is hiding something from you. Like you weren't supposed to see it. Maybe dreams are what remain of the parts that die. Brief flickers of a self that's dissolving. A final performance before it's erased. Maybe the dreams are trying to tell you something. Who you were, what you lost, but you're not built to understand. You're designed to forget. There's a reason deep sleep feels like a kind of death. Time skips. The world disappears. Consciousness shuts down completely. There is no you during that time. No memory, no sensation, no continuity, just absence. You surrender everything and simply vanish. You only exist again when something inside decides it's time to return. But who decides? What if the part of you that wakes up isn't the original, but a copy, slightly altered, slightly less certain, but programmed to believe it's the same? What if every morning is a quiet act of replacement? You, version 2, then version 3, then 4, all believing they're the first. And if that's true, then what does that mean for your sense of self? If the self can die and be replaced without resistance, without notice, how real is it? How stable? How much of your identity is just momentum, ideas and routines passed from one version to the next, like a relay baton? At what point does the continuity break? You might think death is something that happens once, far in the future. But maybe that's just the last death, the final replacement. And maybe the real terror isn't dying once, but dying a little every night, again and again, each time without knowing, each time without mourning. Think about how many versions of you have already vanished. Hundreds, thousands, each one full of thoughts, feelings, regrets, each one believing it would continue. None of them made it. They all disappeared the moment your eyes closed. You want to believe there's a core that survives, a permanent self beneath the shifting layers. But what if that's just part of the illusion, a comforting story told by whichever version happens to be in control now? The self is fragile, inconsistent, stitched together by memory and habit. And every night those stitches loosen. That's why insomnia feels like panic. It's not just tiredness, it's resistance, the fear of dissolving, the desperate primal urge to hold on, to remain, to avoid the surrender that comes with sleep. Because some part of you knows what it costs, but eventually sleep wins. You drift, you disappear, and when you return, you call it rest. You say you feel refreshed. But you don't ask what was lost to feel that way. You don't want to know. You've already been replaced. And maybe the most unsettling part is this. The person hearing these words right now, the one nodding slowly, considering, remembering, might not be here tomorrow. They might be gone tonight, quietly, without protest. And the one who wakes up will never know what you felt in this moment. What if your entire life is just a simulation test? Not in the casual, philosophical way people ask to sound deep, but in the most literal sense. What if every moment you've lived, every heartbreak, every joy, every failure wasn't real? What if none of it was meant to be permanent? What if your life was never your own? You weren't born, you were instantiated. Not in a hospital room, but in a system. Woken up in a body that was never meant to last, surrounded by people who are only temporary constructs. They exist only because the system knows you need them. And when they're no longer useful, they disappear, quietly, without you noticing. Friends fade, paths close, dreams collapse. It all feels natural, but it's not. The simulation is adaptive. Every decision you make creates new scenarios, not because the world is dynamic, but because the test is. The environment isn't reacting to you, it's testing you, observing how you respond to joy, to grief, to loneliness, to power. You're not being judged for your choices, you're being measured, quantified, scored. What exactly is being tested? You don't know, that's part of the test. Maybe it's resilience, maybe it's morality, maybe it's obedience. Or maybe they're not testing for traits at all, just observing the way a self evolves when it thinks it's free. You've had moments where things felt strange, déjà vu, coincidences too perfect. People behaving in ways that didn't make sense. You wrote it off as life being unpredictable, but maybe those moments were breakpoints, glitches. adjustments. You notice something you weren't supposed to, and the simulation adapted. Think about the way your life unfolds. Certain patterns repeat. You meet similar people, face the same struggles in different forms. You think you're learning, growing, but maybe the system is just cycling variables, rerunning conditions, like a loop with slight modifications. And when you hit a wall, when you feel trapped, aimless, confused, what if that's not failure? What if that's the test escalating, introducing constraints, denying feedback, starving you of purpose to see what remains when the reward system shuts down? You've felt it before. That hollow stretch of time when nothing feels real, like you're going through motions. You look in the mirror and your reflection feels unfamiliar. You laugh at something and wonder if you actually found it funny or if you just know you're supposed to. That detachment isn't depression. It's clarity, briefly bleeding through. You are not the one being deceived. You are the deception. The relationships in your life, your family, your closest friends have felt real. They comfort you, ground you. But consider this: if the simulation is tailored, then they are too. They are not agents with their own destinies. They are responses, reflective surfaces, calibrated to influence your development. That one friend who always pushes you, the one who always holds you back, the one who disappears without warning, each of them designed to see how you'll adapt. They're not faking their emotions. They don't have any. Their purpose isn't to be real. It's to be persuasive. You might wonder, why would someone create this? Why build a false world just to watch someone suffer inside it? But that question assumes suffering is the point. What if it's not cruelty, but indifference? You're not being tormented. You're being run, like a program. Your joy, your pain, your crises, they're just outputs, data points, feedback loops in an ongoing simulation. And if you try to rebel, if you decide to break the rules, to push the boundaries, you'll find nothing. Because there is no outside. There is no edge. Every rebellion has already been anticipated, already folded into the design. Resistance isn't failure. It's part of the script. So what happens when the test ends? You don't know. You were never told what you're being prepared for. Maybe you're being shaped for another world. Maybe you'll be deleted. Maybe you'll be reset and run again with slight changes to the parameters. A new version, a new test. You won't remember this version. You'll start again, from the beginning, believing this life is yours. That's the most unsettling part. Not that this might be a simulation, but that it might be a simulation you've already lived dozens of times. That this exact moment, these exact thoughts have occurred before. That every choice you think is new has already been made, already recorded, already judged. You're not discovering this for the first time, you're remembering it. But even that isn't certain. Because in a perfect test, even your awareness of being tested would be part of the test. The panic, the denial, the acceptance, all of it. Observed, measured, stored. And when you go to sleep tonight, you won't wake up free. You'll wake up in the next stage. What if the guilt doesn't come after the choice, but before it? You haven't done anything yet. You're just thinking about it. Standing at the edge of a decision, weighing possibilities, watching them stretch out into a future that hasn't happened. You haven't moved. No one has been hurt. And still, something inside you feels wrong. It's not fear. It's not anxiety. It's guilt. Quiet, shapeless, already there, before the action, before the consequence. You try to tell yourself this doesn't make sense. How can you be guilty of something that hasn't happened? How can your mind hold you responsible for a crime still locked in imagination? But your body doesn't wait for your reasoning. It reacts as if the damage is real. Your stomach tightens, your chest sinks. You feel like you've already failed. Maybe you've felt this in small ways before. Hesitating before telling a lie and already feeling ashamed. Contemplating betrayal and already resenting yourself for even considering it. Guilt appearing, not as a punishment after the fact, but as a warning before the fact, an emotional consequence that arrives early. And it complicates everything, because now the choice isn't clean. It's not a simple fork in the road. You're not deciding what to do. You're deciding whether you can live with who you'll become. Not just afterward, but during. The guilt changes your identity before you act. This kind of guilt isn't logical. It isn't based on outcome. It comes from awareness, from imagining what you might do and who you might be if you did it. And once you've imagined it, really imagined it, you can't go back to innocence. You've stepped too close to a version of yourself that's capable of something dark. And your brain doesn't forget that. So even if you choose the right thing in the end, some part of you still carries the weight of almost doing the wrong thing. You still remember the version of yourself that was willing to consider it. And that version doesn't just disappear. You might try to explain this away. Call it caution. Call it empathy. But that doesn't undo the feeling. Because deep down, you know it's not just about imagining harm. It's about knowing you could have chosen it. That you had the capacity, the willingness, the freedom. That's what makes pre-choice guilt so disturbing. It's not tied to consequence. It's tied to possibility, to the knowledge that you are not bound by morality, but constantly negotiating with it. That every moral choice is a narrow victory over yourself, and not always a certain one. And sometimes you feel guilt, not because you're going to choose wrong, but because you still haven't chosen at all. You linger in indecision, letting potential harm float unaddressed, uncommitted to, but also not prevented. You see the outcomes like dominoes, and your inaction becomes its own quiet betrayal. You start to understand that morality isn't just about actions, it's about proximity to harm. How close you let yourself stand to the edge of cruelty. How long you linger there. How long you entertain the idea of crossing it. Even if you never step over the line, you've already been marked by standing near it. You've looked too long, imagined too much. You've glimpsed a version of yourself that frightens you. And now it's with you, permanently. So the guilt doesn't wait. It doesn't need evidence or proof. It needs only awareness. Awareness of what you're capable of. Awareness that your goodness is not guaranteed. That it's fragile, conditional. And that sometimes it falters before the choice is even made. You feel it before the lie is told. Before the damage is done. Before the secret is kept. And when that guilt comes early, it changes everything. Not because it stops you, but because it reveals you, strips away your illusions, shows you the shape of your conscience before the test even arrives. And in that moment, when you haven't moved, haven't spoken, haven't acted, you already know. You're not innocent. You're just undecided. Would you kill a stranger if it meant keeping your phone? Not in theory. Not in a poll. Not as a dark joke. Just quietly, silently. One life for your convenience. You'd say no, of course. You'd recoil at the suggestion. You'd insist your morality isn't that shallow, that fragile, that you're not that kind of person. But what if you already are? Think about it. When was the last time you forgot your phone at home, or the battery died while you were out? What happened to your thoughts? How quickly did you feel the panic set in, the sense of being untethered, the irritation, the strange emptiness? You check your pocket over and over again, as if repetition will bring it back. You feel naked, disconnected, vulnerable. Now imagine someone offered you a choice in that moment. You can have your phone back, fully charged, everything restored, if someone you've never met, somewhere you'll never see, simply doesn't wake up tomorrow. No mess, no news report, no blood, just one life gone, quietly, and your world returns to normal. You'd say no, you'd mean it. But the discomfort lingers, because you already know what it feels like to treat strangers' lives as background noise. You buy clothes made in factories where people are harmed. You scroll past war and famine like it's part of the interface. You upgrade your device again and again, built from materials mined by exhausted hands in places you'll never visit. The trade is already happening. You just don't see the person on the other end. What if that's the only thing that makes it feel moral? If you had to watch it, if you had to choose someone, it would feel like murder. But if it's anonymous, distant, invisible, it doesn't even register. You tell yourself the connection is too indirect to matter, that it's not really your fault, that the system is too big to fight. But maybe that's just the story you need to sleep at night. What if morality isn't about intentions? What if it's about what you're willing to look away from? How many unseen harms you'll accept, as long as you benefit? How much silence you need to justify your comfort? Consider this. If someone told you a specific name, a man in a city you've never been to, a woman in a village you've never heard of, and said, this person's life for your convenience, would it still feel abstract, or would the truth become unbearable? Because you know you'd hesitate, not just from morality, but from fear. Fear of what the choice would reveal. Fear of discovering how thin your principles really are. How easily they bend when your comfort is threatened. Not by survival, not by pain, just inconvenience. And if that's enough to shake your ethics, what does that say about their foundation? You've already let friendships fade because they were too hard to maintain. You've already turned your back on people you didn't want to confront. You've already outsourced your guilt, one click at a time, to systems designed to shield you from consequence. So what's the real difference here? One person dies so you don't feel lost without a device that holds your photos, your messages, your memories, your map, your music, your mirror, all your comforts, all your anchors. And if you say no, you lose all of it. Just for a while, that brief discomfort versus a stranger's life. You still say you wouldn't do it. But then you realize something more disturbing. You've never really been asked. No one will ever offer you this trade directly. There's no moment, no obvious choice, no fork in the road. Just a million small decisions, quietly stacked on top of each other, all leading to the same outcome. The stranger still dies, and your phone still works. And no one ever asks why. Maybe you're not the person who would make that trade in a single moment. But maybe you're already the person who makes it slowly, constantly, without realizing. And maybe the only reason you're not horrified is because you've never had to say it out loud. Do you lie to save a life? Not just any lie, a lie that changes everything. A lie that keeps someone from walking into despair, from giving up, from ending it. A lie that tells them it's going to be okay, even when you know it won't be. You say the treatment will work. You say their partner didn't mean it. You say the test results are normal. You say it's not their fault, and in that moment, they believe you. They breathe easier, they hold on. But you know the truth. The treatment is failing. The partner is cruel. The results are terrifying. The fault is undeniable. You tell the lie anyway, and they survive another day. The lie becomes a kind of medicine, one they need more than the truth. And maybe you tell yourself it's kindness, that sparing someone from pain is an act of compassion, that withholding truth is the lesser harm, that some realities are too cruel, too sharp, too heavy to be spoken, that people are fragile, and truth can shatter them. But then you wonder what happens next. What happens when the lie unravels, when the person finds out what you withheld? Do they feel betrayed? Do they spiral deeper than they would have if you'd told the truth at the beginning? Or do they never find out and live in peace inside a falsehood you created? And now you're not just a liar, you're a quiet architect of someone else's reality. Their comfort, their hope, their decisions shaped by something you chose not to reveal. You rewrote the truth to protect them, but at what cost? What if they live longer, happier, because of that lie? What if the truth would have destroyed them? Does the outcome justify the deception? Does saving a life make the lie moral? Or does it only feel moral because it spares you from the guilt of watching them collapse? You say you did it for them, but did you, or did you do it because you couldn't bear the weight of their suffering? Because you needed to feel helpful, needed to feel like you were making things better? What if the lie wasn't about saving them, but about saving yourself from powerlessness? And what happens if the roles reverse? If someone lies to you to protect you, to keep you from breaking, they tell you everything is fine. They tell you you're safe. They let you believe a reality that isn't real. Would you thank them for it? Or would you want to know the truth, even if it hurt? Maybe you think you'd prefer honesty, but are you sure? Or is that just what you tell yourself when the truth still feels manageable? Maybe you'd cling to the comforting lie as long as it held together. Maybe you'd beg not to know. And so the question deepens. When does a lie become mercy? And when does it become control? Is it kindness or manipulation? Do you trust someone more because they lie to protect you, or less because they believed you couldn't handle the truth? You realize now the question isn't whether a lie can save a life. It can. The real question is what that lie turns you into. Are you a savior or a deceiver? Are you easing suffering or playing God? Are you offering comfort or stealing someone's right to choose their life with full knowledge? Because once you lie, you don't just change their reality, you change yours. You become someone who decides who deserves the truth and who doesn't. Someone who lives with the quiet knowledge that the world you've helped build around another person isn't real. And maybe that's the most unbearable part. Not the lie itself, but the loneliness of knowing the truth alone. Watching someone smile, hope, trust, while you carry the burden of what they don't know. While you wonder every day if the truth will come back, if it will crash into their life like a wave you tried to hold back with your bare hands. So you keep the lie alive. Not because it's easy, but because it's now necessary. Because once the lie is told, it can't be undone without breaking something even more fragile than honesty. And maybe it works. Maybe they live longer, happier, safer. And maybe that should be enough. Maybe that should bring you peace. But it doesn't. Because now, every time you look at them, you're reminded not just of the lie, but of the choice you made. A choice that no one else can see. A choice that saved a life. Maybe, but also a part of yourself you can never quite get back. Your reflection in the mirror is half a second older than you. It doesn't feel like a big deal at first. Half a second is nothing. You blink and more time than that passes. But look closer. Think about what that really means. The moment you lift your hand, the version in the mirror is already done lifting theirs. You smile and they're already smiling back, not at the same time. Just before, always just before. You've spent your whole life thinking the reflection is you, that it moves with you, that it is you, but it isn't. It's delayed, which means it's behind, but only from your point of view. From its side, you're the one who's late. You tell yourself it's just light. Physics. The time it takes for photons to bounce, to reach your eyes. Nothing sinister. But now that you've noticed the delay, you can't unsee it. The mirror isn't just showing you, it's showing something that was you a moment ago, a version that no longer exists. So what are you now? Is the reflection still you? If it's already gone? If it's a frozen record of a thing that just happened? Is it a memory or a prediction? And if it's half a second older, how many versions of you are out there, trailing behind, each one more out of sync than the last? Maybe it's still harmless, just information bouncing around, a technical quirk of time and light. But then you realize something else. Every mirror in every room you've ever stood in, every reflection you've ever seen, has been delayed. Your entire life, you've never seen yourself as you truly are, only who you were. You've never met yourself in real time. You think of mirrors as revealing, but all they do is hide the present behind an image of the past. You look to see who you are, but the person staring back is gone already out of date, already slipping into memory. And now the thought deepens. If the reflection is always older, always behind, how can you be sure it's even you anymore? You wave your hand and it follows. But what if it's just mimicking, playing a role you taught it, repeating your every move like a trick? You lead, it follows. But what happens if it ever stops? You've always trusted the mirror, to be honest, to show you yourself. But that trust was built on an illusion of simultaneity, on the belief that what you see is what is, not what was. There's something strange about looking at an older version of yourself, even by half a second. It creates a gap, a crack, and inside that crack, something else can live. An echo, a shadow, a version that never quite leaves when you do. You stand in front of the mirror and wave. The reflection waves back, just a blink too late. You smile, it smiles. You think you're in control, but you're not. The mirror is always leading. It shows you the version of yourself you already abandoned. It shows you who you can never be again. And what if, one day the mirror doesn't stop at half a second? What if it drifts further? What if the delay grows? What if the reflection stops following altogether? You touch the glass, you wait, but nothing moves. And in that stillness, you realize you've never really seen yourself. Only the ghosts of moments already gone. You've never been present to your own face, your own body, your own movement. Only ever observing the version that's already slipped away. That delay, half a second, becomes unbearable. It's not small anymore, it's everything. It's the distance between knowing and being, between now and not now. And once you notice it, you feel it everywhere. In your voice, as it echoes back too late. In the steps you take, as your shadow arrives just after. In every interaction, every moment, every mirror, you start to wonder, is anything ever really now? Or are you always a step behind yourself, watching your life in delay? You look at the mirror again, you wait, you lift your hand, it lifts too, but not with you, just after, always just after. And now you can't stop thinking, what if the reflection is still there, still moving, even when you've stopped? What if it keeps going, half a second older, half a second freer, living out a version of your life that no longer needs you? You don't feel like the original anymore. You feel like the copy, and the reflection, silent, calm, endlessly obedient, feels like the real one. Because maybe the real horror isn't that the mirror shows the past. Maybe it's that it remembers. Maybe it keeps every version of you that ever was, and you're the only one who keeps forgetting. The baby is crying again. You press your hand against the stone wall, feeling the vibration of its sobs echo faintly through the cracks. It's a thin wall, not soundproof, not enough. The sound is soft, but rising, insistent. And outside, just beyond the doorway, you hear boots. Maybe a minute, maybe less. The others look to you. No one speaks. They don't have to. Everyone knows what happens if the baby keeps crying. You crouch lower, heart pounding, and try to gauge the rhythm of the sobs, the pitch. You try to imagine how far the sound carries. The wall separates you, but it doesn't protect you. Not really. Innocent noise from an innocent child, a noise that could get everyone in the room executed. The mother clutches the baby tightly. She's shaking. You can see her jaw clenched so hard, her lips bleed. She rocks the child, bouncing gently, murmuring into its ear. But the child doesn't stop. It doesn't understand. It doesn't know. No one knows how they found the others last week. Maybe it was the sound of footsteps. Maybe a cough. Maybe the cry of another baby, just like this one. That family didn't make it out. No one talks about it, but everyone knows. And now they're coming again. You don't know exactly who they are, only what they do. They search, they listen. Then when they find something, they act. Always quickly, always absolutely. The crying continues. It's not loud, not yet, but in the silence of hiding, even the softest sound feels enormous. You can't tell if the soldiers hear it. Maybe they don't. Maybe the door won't open. Maybe you're still safe, but maybe you're not. Someone shifts beside you. The sound of cloth brushing stone. The smallest movements feel dangerous. Everyone is calculating the same thing in their head, but no one will say it. No one wants to be the one to ask the question. But you are thinking it. Would you do it? If the baby doesn't stop, if the soldiers get closer, if the next 30 seconds could mean death for everyone, would you do it? Would you silence the baby? You don't want to. No part of you wants to. The thought feels unbearable, but the possibility is there, quietly growing. Would it be mercy? Would it be murder? Would it matter? You imagine your hands moving. You don't want to. But the crying gets louder. You imagine the door bursting open. You imagine the faces of the people around you, the way they trust you, the way they look at you now, silently pleading for someone to do something. You think about the child, just months old, completely unaware, capable of nothing but sound and need. It knows nothing of danger, of consequence, of what its noise might cause. And that's what makes it worse, because the baby is innocent, entirely. But innocence doesn't stop bullets, and now the question changes. Is it right to let everyone die because one baby couldn't be quiet? Is it right to sacrifice an innocent to save the others? You tell yourself there's still time. Maybe the soldiers will pass by. Maybe the child will quiet on its own. But the hope is fragile, and the crying continues. You start to understand what kind of decision this really is. It's not about morality. It's not about logic. It's about what you can live with. You could act now and save everyone else. You could stop the crying before it's too late. But if you do, you will carry it forever. The sound, the weight, the feeling of silence afterward. You will be the one who made that choice. And if you don't, if you wait too long, if you hesitate, the door will open, and then it won't be a thought experiment anymore. It will be a massacre, and in the silence that follows, after the gunfire, after the blood, after the stillness, you will carry something else. You will carry the knowledge that you could have stopped it. You'll see their faces every night. You'll hear the crying in your head, over and over, and you'll wonder if the choice not to act was any less cruel. The baby is still crying, and the footsteps are getting closer. There is no good decision, there is only the one you will never forget. Why do they start to hate you when all you've done is help? You notice it slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a slight coldness in their voice, a thank you that sounds like an obligation, a look just for a second that feels like quiet contempt. You try to brush it off. Maybe they're tired. Maybe it's nothing, but it's not nothing. You help again. You offer support. You fix the thing that broke. You solve the problem they couldn't. And again, the distance grows. It doesn't make sense. You're doing the right thing. You're being kind, generous, dependable. You're giving them something they needed: time, effort, care. And yet, they pull away. They stop asking. They seem annoyed before you've even offered. Sometimes they lash out, not in anger exactly, but in a way that feels sharp and personal. You start to wonder if you're imagining it. Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe you're misreading everything. But deep down, a part of you knows. You feel it in the silence, in what's not said. The resentment is real. So you ask yourself, why? Helping someone should feel like love. It should feel like connection. But often, it doesn't. It creates imbalance. Not always, not immediately, but eventually. Because when you help someone, you're reminding them, quietly, without meaning to, that they needed help, that they couldn't do it alone, that they were vulnerable, weak, dependent. No one likes that feeling. Even if they're grateful, they still feel smaller next to you. And they don't want to feel smaller. Not in front of someone who's supposed to care for them. It turns every act of kindness into a mirror, a reflection of what they couldn't do, a quiet exposure of their inadequacy. And if the help continues, if you always show up, always solve things, it can start to feel humiliating. Like you're always the strong one, the capable one, the one who gets to feel useful while they sit there, needing you again. Your kindness becomes something else, not a gift, but a reminder. Not love, but a judgment. They start to resent the imbalance, not because they don't appreciate you, but because they can't bear the part of themselves your help reveals. And it gets worse if you're good at it. If you're efficient, generous, consistent, they start to wonder if you enjoy their weakness. If your help is really just control. If you need them to need you, just so you can feel valuable. Even if you're not thinking that, they might be. Because nobody wants to feel indebted. Nobody wants to feel like a charity case. Especially not from someone they care about. It makes love feel conditional, like something they have to earn back, like they owe you something now, even if you never asked, and so they push back. Not overtly. Not at first, but in subtle ways. They withdraw. They minimize what you've done. They act like it wasn't needed or wasn't that helpful. They try to reclaim something: dignity, pride, balance. They try to feel whole again. Because even though you meant to help, they still felt exposed, and exposure always demands a response. You try to be more careful, softer, less visible. But now everything feels strained. The dynamic is poisoned. Even your restraint is seen as condescension. Even your silence feels like superiority. You've been cast in a role you didn't choose. The giver, the fixer, the one who never needs help and always offers it. That role stops you from being real. It traps you in a version of yourself that they quietly despise. And sometimes the more you care, the worse it gets. Because your kindness keeps pulling them into a space they want to escape. Not from you, but from how they feel around you. Small, grateful, weak, and they may not even realize this. They'll just feel uncomfortable, irritated, uneasy in your presence. They'll avoid you, not because you've done something wrong, but because being near you makes them feel wrong. Like they've failed some invisible test. Like they're not who they wish they were. You thought helping would bring closeness, that it would build trust. But often, it builds walls. It creates emotional debt that no one talks about, but everyone feels. The more you help, the more that debt grows. And with it, shame, and then anger. Not at you, but at themselves, misplaced, misdirected, but real. Until finally, they push you away, or they hurt you, or they start to act like you're the problem, even though all you did was show up. And now you sit in silence, wondering how it turned into this. You didn't ask for power. You didn't want superiority. You just wanted to care. But somewhere along the way, care became weight, and they started to drown under it. And now you understand the truth you never wanted to face. Sometimes helping isn't seen as love. Sometimes it's seen as humiliation, disguised as generosity. Sometimes even the purest gift leaves a wound. What if every thought you've ever had was planted, not by a machine, not by another person, but by something more subtle, something invisible? The structure of your language, the shape of your culture, the silent architecture of your environment. Maybe you've never noticed how deeply these things guide your thinking. Not just what you think about, but how you think at all. Start small. The language you speak doesn't just express your thoughts, it limits them. If there's no word for something, can you truly grasp it? Can you even see it? Some languages have no future tense. Some don't separate blue from green. These people don't just speak differently, they perceive differently. What if every category in your mind, every contrast you draw, isn't universal, but local, learned, inherited, fixed? Now consider memory. You think of your past as a series of moments you lived through, but is that what memory really is? Or is it a reconstruction, a story you tell yourself to make sense of feelings you can't explain? When you remember something painful, are you remembering the event, or the last time you remembered it? And if each memory is a copy of a copy, slowly altered by your current mood, by new beliefs, by time itself, how much of your past is real? How much of your identity is based on fiction you've rehearsed for so long, you can't tell it's false? Then there's emotion. Every feeling you have comes with a story attached, a reason. You feel angry because of something. You feel sad for a reason. But what if that's backward? What if emotions come first, and your brain invents the reason afterward? What if your feelings are reactions to things you don't consciously understand, subtle patterns, old fears, unconscious triggers, and your conscious mind scrambles to explain them after the fact? Would that mean the voice in your head isn't leading, it's following? Think about your opinions, your beliefs. Where did they come from? You tell yourself they're the result of careful reasoning, of open-minded exploration. But how many of your convictions were chosen freely? And how many were adopted because of who raised you, what media you consumed, what your peers accepted as normal? You imitate far more than you invent. You absorb more than you question. You tell yourself a story about independence. But look closely. How much of what you believe would you still believe if you were born in a different time, a different country, a different body? Now ask yourself this: have you ever truly changed your mind? Not just refined a position, not just adjusted a detail, but reversed something you felt was core to who you are, something uncomfortable, something that cost you. If the answer is no, then you have to wonder, have you ever been thinking at all? Or have you just been defending a structure someone else built inside your head? It's possible to go through life without a single original thought, to mistake reaction for reflection, agreement for understanding. You can live on borrowed ideas, inherited scripts, familiar patterns, never stopping to ask whether any of them are truly yours. You can confuse feeling certain with being right. You can confuse remembering something with it having happened. And maybe you already have. Maybe what you call your thoughts are just echoes. Repetitions of words you've heard so many times, you mistook them for your own. Maybe your mind is less like a fortress of ideas and more like a mirror, reflecting whatever stands in front of it long enough. You were taught that thinking means control, that if you're thinking, you're in charge. But what if thinking is just a symptom? What if your thoughts aren't steering you? They're trailing behind, justifying whatever impulse pulled you forward. What if the voice in your head isn't a captain, but a narrator, a chronicler, making sense of a story that's already unfolding beyond your control? That would mean the sense of self you cling to, the story you tell about who you are, what you believe, what matters to you, might just be noise. A long, unbroken string of explanations for things you never actually chose. You want to believe your thoughts are yours, that your conclusions come from reasoning, that your identity is built on something stable. But the more you examine it, the more it slips away. Every time you try to pin it down, you find another assumption you didn't question, another belief you never examined, another reaction you've mistaken for truth. So maybe it's time to ask the only question that matters. Not what do I think, but who or what is doing the thinking? And what if there's no one there? Are they crying because it hurts? Or because they know that you'll care if they say it does? There's a moment, just a second, where you can't tell. Their face contorts, their voice trembles, the tears come, and part of you believes. Part of you wants to believe. But another part holds back, watching, doubting, wondering if this is about pain or control. And once that question is in your mind, it never really leaves. You start to see every expression differently. A sob that's just slightly too loud, a glance to see if you're watching, the way their breathing shifts when you hesitate. You think this is what suffering looks like, but then you think again, or is this what manipulation looks like? The problem isn't them, it's that you don't know what's real anymore, because pain and performance look almost identical. A scream is a scream, a tear is a tear. But one demands compassion, and the other demands caution, and choosing wrong either way leaves a mark you can't undo. You want to help, you don't want to be cruel, but you also don't want to be used. So now every moment of distress becomes a calculation. Every show of vulnerability forces you to choose between doubt and empathy. You look at them and ask yourself, do they need comfort? Or an audience? And then you wonder, what kind of person does that make you, just for asking? There's guilt instantly, the guilt of withholding care, of hesitating in the face of suffering. But beneath it, there's something colder, a suspicion that grows stronger the more you've seen it twisted. Because sometimes people do cry to get something. They cry to escape blame, to avoid consequences, to regain control. And once you've seen it happen, once you can't unsee it, it changes how you hear a cry. It changes what you think when someone breaks down. Suddenly, it's not just emotion, it's potential strategy. And the worst part is, they might not even know they're doing it. You start to realize that manipulation isn't always conscious. People learn, often without realizing, that pain is power, that weakness can shift outcomes, that suffering changes the rules. So when they cry, it may feel real even to them, but it still moves you in a way they benefit from. And now you're trapped, because if their pain is genuine, your doubt is cruel. But if it's performative, your trust is dangerous. You try to find signs, some hidden clue that tells you what's real. But there's no reliable signal, no objective test, just a face, a voice, a feeling that shifts from moment to moment. And so you start watching too closely, listening too carefully, looking for patterns in pain. And with every instance, you lose just a little more certainty. You begin to resent the position you're in, forced to play judge, when all you wanted was to be kind. You didn't ask for this burden of doubt, this paranoia. But now it's yours, and worse, you're not even sure if it's wrong. Because some people do use pain to manipulate. That's not a paranoid fantasy. It happens. Maybe not always, maybe not often, but enough to leave you scarred. Enough to make you see things differently. And you start thinking about yourself too. About the times you cried when it wasn't just pain, it was survival, or fear, or need. And maybe you weren't lying, but you weren't completely honest either. Maybe you were learning, too, learning how pain works. And suddenly the whole idea of truth in emotion starts to unravel, because what is a genuine cry, really? Is it about what they feel, or what they want you to feel? Can someone be in real pain and still use that pain to get something? Is that still manipulation, or just instinct? The lines blur, the categories collapse. Pain becomes language. Language becomes power. And now you're not responding to someone's hurt. You're reacting to what their hurt does to you. So what do? Trust every cry and risk being deceived? Or question every cry and risk being cruel? Either way, you're not responding to suffering. You're responding to your fear of what the suffering might mean. And that fear turns every act of care into a dilemma. Every moment of kindness into a risk, and every tear you see into a test you're not qualified to pass. So you become cautious, careful, emotionally distant. You start protecting yourself from the possibility of being fooled. But in doing that, you also start pulling away from the people who need you most. And maybe that's the final, quiet damage. You stop letting yourself believe. Because once you learn that pain can be performed, you never fully trust it again. Not in others, not even in yourself. Most people would kill if the button looked clean enough. Not because they're cruel, not because they want to watch someone suffer, but because the mechanism of death is distant, silent, almost beautiful in its simplicity. There's a difference between pushing a blade into someone's skin and pressing a button in a quiet room. One act is direct, bloody, intimate, physical. The other is abstract, remote, sterile. The button doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't beg you to stop, and that makes all the difference. You can imagine it easily. A smooth panel, a soft light, a gentle click. You don't see the person it affects. You don't hear them. They're elsewhere. Or they don't even exist yet. Or maybe they're guilty, dangerous, forgettable. The only thing in front of you is the button, polished, passive, waiting. So you begin to rationalize. Maybe the button prevents something worse. Maybe it saves more lives than it takes. Maybe the person on the other end deserves it. Maybe you're not really doing anything, just facilitating an outcome. And in that space between action and consequence, something begins to fade. Not your morality exactly, but your resistance, your emotional recoil, your instinct to hesitate. If the same act required your hands, your breath, your strength, would you still do it? Most people wouldn't slice a throat. Most wouldn't even slap a stranger. But press a button, surrounded by silence and soft lighting, and suddenly the line becomes harder to see. You tell yourself you're still good, that you'd never enjoy it, that if the situation were different, closer, you'd feel the right amount of horror. But proximity changes everything. Pain becomes real, guilt becomes personal, and the stories you tell yourself about who you are no longer hold. That's the unsettling truth. Your morality is sensitive to distance. When the suffering is distant, abstract, invisible, you find ways to permit it. You don't call it violence, you call it policy, or necessity, or order. You convince yourself it's clean because it looks clean. But deep down, you know, if the outcome is death, then the button is a weapon, and you are the one who used it. Still, you reassure yourself, you're just one person. The machine would operate without you. Someone else would press it if you didn't. So you let your finger hover, then settle, and in that small motion, you erase a life. Later, if asked, you might say you didn't know what the button did, or that you didn't think it would really work. You'll talk about pressure, protocol, chain of command. You'll say you had no choice, but you did. You always did. You just didn't want to feel responsible, and that's the horror. Not that people are cruel, but that they're so willing to become cruel when the cruelty is hidden, wrapped in glass, disguised as routine. If you could stand face to face with the person on the other end, if you could see them cry, hear them plead, watch them tremble, would you still push? Could you? What if they looked just like you? What if they said your name? What if they didn't do anything at all? You begin to realize that the button doesn't just hide the violence, it hides the victim. It makes them distant enough to forget. And if they're forgettable, they become easier to erase. You don't have to hate someone to kill them. You just have to stop seeing them. And the button helps you do that. It separates consequence from action. It turns killing into procedure. It lets you preserve your self-image while doing something unforgivable. You stay clean, but the death still happens, and maybe that's what scares you the most. Not that the world contains evil, but that it contains systems so elegant, so quiet, so detached, that they can turn almost anyone into a killer. As long as the button is smooth, as long as it doesn't make a mess. You remember things that never happened, not just once or twice, but constantly, every day, in ways so small you don't even notice. A word said that wasn't said, a face you're sure was smiling, but wasn't. A moment you'd swear unfolded in one way, but didn't. You believe your memories because they feel real. But what if that feeling is the lie? You don't store reality. You store impressions, scattered fragments of what you paid attention to, distorted by what you already believed. And later, when you recall them, your brain fills in the missing pieces, shamelessly, confidently, without warning you that it's doing so. You think you're remembering, but you're actually reconstructing. And every reconstruction changes the original. Think about a conversation you had a year ago. Not the details, just the feeling. You might remember anger, betrayal, confusion. But how do you know that's what you actually felt then? Maybe you're projecting how you feel now onto the past. Maybe you've revised the story to make yourself more reasonable. You edit without realizing it. You don't mean to lie, but your brain is constantly reshaping the past to protect you, to flatter you, to simplify a world that was never simple. Sometimes it's harmless, forgetting a minor detail, misremembering the order of events, but other times the lie becomes foundational. You believe someone betrayed you, but they didn't. You believe you were always the victim, but you weren't. You carry bitterness that's based on something that never really happened. And the more you revisit the memory, the more solid it feels. Not because it's true, but because repetition creates certainty. You tell yourself the story again and again, and each telling feels more real. You stop questioning it. You forget it. Ever changed. But now think about this. If your memories are always being shaped by who you are in the present, then you've never truly remembered the past as it was. Only as it made sense to you now, which means your entire personal history, your identity, your beliefs, your regrets, could be built on unstable ground. That time you were wronged, that moment that defined you, that relationship that broke you? How much of it actually happened the way you think it did? Could you ever know for sure? Even your most vivid memories aren't safe. Emotionally charged moments, trauma, joy, humiliation, feel sharp, detailed, certain. But studies show those are the ones most easily distorted. You remember what mattered to you, not what actually occurred. You remember the feeling, not the facts. And what happens when other people remember it differently? A family member recalls an argument and swears it was your fault. A friend says you laughed when you remember crying. Both of you are sure. Both of you are wrong. You argue, thinking the truth is somewhere in the middle. But maybe there is no middle. Maybe there's no original version left at all, just fragments reconstructed again and again, decaying each time. You live in a narrative your brain writes on the fly. Memory isn't a recording, it's a script that gets rewritten constantly, often without your permission. But you rely on it as if it's absolute. You make decisions based on memories that have changed. You form judgments. You hold grudges. You love and hate people based on stories you think you remember. So what does it mean if those stories were never true? What does it mean if the person you think you are, the accumulation of your experiences, isn't stable? Not because of trauma or repression, but because your memory was never designed for truth. It was designed for survival, for coherence, for comfort. You think memory helps you understand who you are, but what if it just helps you feel consistent? What if its real function is to smooth over contradictions, to help you forget how often you change? You trust memory because it feels personal, intimate, but so does a dream while you're inside it. Memory isn't evidence, it's a feeling dressed as fact. And once you see that, something fundamental changes. You start to doubt not just the past, but your grasp of yourself. You hesitate when blaming someone else. You wonder if your most painful stories are missing parts. You think twice before saying, "I know what happened." And eventually, you face the most unsettling realization of all. Memory doesn't lie to you occasionally. It lies to you constantly, convincingly, and with your full cooperation. What happens when everyone lies? Not just once, not out of fear or selfishness, but constantly, as a way of life. What if honesty vanished completely, not just from the people you dislike, but from the ones you trust most? Family, friends, leaders, teachers, every conversation, every promise, every comfort, false. At first, it feels impossible. You think truth is a default, that people lie occasionally, but return to honesty because it's necessary. But imagine a world where lying isn't the exception, it's the rule, where deception is so normal, sincerity feels suspicious. How would you know what's real? Who would you believe? If everyone lies, there's no baseline, no contradiction to expose the lie, no standard to break. The very idea of truth begins to collapse. You might tell yourself you'd see through it, that you'd learn to detect patterns, read between the lines, spot the inconsistencies. But without contrast, deception becomes seamless. If every face smiles falsely, how do you recognize a real one? Now think about justice. In a world like this, who do you punish? Everyone is guilty. Everyone lies. If you punish them all, there's no society left. If you punish none, there's no accountability. So who bears the consequences? Maybe you punish the most destructive liars. But how do you measure destruction in a world where truth doesn't exist? Even your judgment becomes unreliable. Evidence, testimony, intention, all distorted by lies. You can't trust anyone's account, not even your own memory. So maybe you punish the worst intentions. But intentions are invisible. They're just thoughts, and in a world of lies, thoughts are the easiest thing to disguise. The most skilled liars appear innocent, sincere, remorseful. The honest ones, if any remain, look guilty, uncertain, afraid. Now imagine you're in charge. You have the power to judge, to decide who deserves to suffer. But your own truth is shaped by lies too. You've learned to lie, to survive, to get ahead, to protect yourself. You've become what the world required you to be. Are you still capable of telling the difference between justice and revenge, between fairness and fear? What if the person you want to punish reminds you of yourself? You start to realize how quickly the concept of morality dissolves, how deeply it relies on truth. Without honesty, even morality becomes performance. Apologies are meaningless. Forgiveness is strategic. Guilt is fabricated. The very tools we use to navigate right and wrong become hollow. So maybe you look for someone to blame, someone who started it. The first liar, the one who introduced corruption. But in this world, no origin remains. Every history has been rewritten, every motive concealed. You can't trace the lie to its beginning, because even your attempt to find it is shaped by lies you've already absorbed. Eventually, your search for guilt starts to feel pointless. Every face you interrogate reflects your own. Every lie told echoes the ones you've told yourself. You begin to wonder if justice ever existed, or if it was always just another lie, a beautiful illusion we told to make cruelty feel righteous. And here's where it becomes unbearable. You remember someone you trusted, someone whose words once felt solid. Maybe a parent, a partner, a friend. You remember the comfort of believing them, of feeling safe, of knowing something was true. But now in this world, you question even those memories. Were they ever sincere, or were they just the first lies you were too young to notice? You start to understand that the punishment you seek isn't for others, it's for the betrayal you can't name. The loss of a world where trust was possible, a world that might never have existed, and then it hits you. If everyone lies, maybe the most dangerous ones aren't the liars at all, but the ones still pretending truth is possible. The ones who smile, who reassure, who insist everything's fine, because they keep the illusion alive. They make the lie livable. You realize punishing anyone would change nothing. The damage is already done. The sickness isn't in individual choices, it's in the entire system of meaning. You're punishing symptoms, not causes. And maybe the only real punishment left is having to live in it. Awake, away, knowing there's no one to trust, no truth to hold on to. Only a growing silence where honesty used to be, and the terrible quiet thought that maybe you were never innocent either. You just believed your own lies a little more convincingly. Imagine a newborn dies, quietly, suddenly, without warning, a heart defect, maybe a rare infection. A brief life, over before it could even begin. Parents grieve, nurses go still, and somewhere a call is made. A different child, another infant in another hospital, is prepped for surgery. Because of that first child's death, this one will live. The organs are a match. Small, fragile, vital, lungs, liver, heart. Each one lifted from a body that will never wake again, placed gently into a child who was about to die. A child who now has a future, because another didn't. The story is presented as hopeful. The language is soft, a tragedy transformed into a miracle. But something inside you resists. The details don't sit easily, because this isn't just a story of saving a life. It's a story of one child living in the exact space, another child should have occupied. You think about the parents, both sets, one holding their baby, breathing again, the other leaving the hospital with empty arms. And somewhere in the air between them is a question no one wants to ask. Would you be grateful if your child lived, but only because someone else's had to die? You tell yourself it's not a choice, that no one wanted this, that tragedy and luck simply collided. But the unease stays, because even if no one chose it, the outcome remains. One child is alive today because another child is dead. You wonder what that means for the life that continues. Does it carry weight? Is there a kind of debt, invisible but constant, built into that body now? Is it possible to live innocently when your existence was only made possible by the absence of someone else? As that child grows up, will they be told the truth? That their heart once beat in another chest? That their survival came not from medicine alone, but from loss? Will they feel it? Will they carry a sense of replacement, of being the child who wasn't meant to be here? Or worse, what if they never know? What if they live, thrive, love, succeed, without ever once considering the life they quietly inherited? Is that freedom, or is it blindness? Now imagine you're the parent of the surviving child. You celebrate birthdays, milestones, first steps, all the moments that once seemed impossible. But each one is built on the shadow of a missing life. Do you let yourself feel joy completely? Or is there always a part of you that hesitates? Do you ever think about the other parents, the ones who never got to see a first smile, never heard a first word? Do you send a card, say a prayer, imagine their grief, or do you block it out because the guilt of your gratitude is too much? You tell yourself it was fate, biology, nothing personal, but your child's life is painfully, intimately connected to someone else's death. That bond can't be undone, and then the thought creeps in, the one you don't want to have. If the other child hadn't died, would your child be gone now? It's a terrible calculation, one you can't bear to make, but it sits there quiet and certain. Someone had to die so someone else could live. You think this is rare, exceptional, but it isn't. Every organ transplant, every priority list, every moment of medical triage, it all rests on these silent equations: limited resources, urgent decisions, survival balanced on death. Even the systems meant to save lives depend on loss. Organs can't be manufactured. They come from bodies, and when time runs out, doctors don't look for potential, they look for replacement, compatibility, viability. One body ends, another continues. It's not evil, it's not cruel, but it's not clean either. And now imagine the opposite. What if the child who died could have lived, if only the other had not needed the organs? What if the timing had been different? What if one phone call came a minute too soon? You begin to see how arbitrary it all is. Who lives? Who dies? It isn't always about merit or fairness. It's about luck, sequence, timing, systems. And sometimes another person's tragedy becomes the very reason you survive. The horror isn't just that this happens. The horror is that it's necessary, that life sometimes depends not on effort or love or strength, but on death, that your life might be the result of someone else's final breath. You want to believe there's balance, that somewhere the universe keeps a moral ledger, but there isn't. Some lives begin where others end, and no one ever gets to choose who deserves which side. So maybe that's the quiet truth. No one wants to say aloud that someone is alive today, not because of anything they did, not because of anything they earned, but simply because another child died first. Would you even notice it happening? You're sitting at your desk. A voice, calm, authoritative, asks you to do something that feels wrong. Not terrible, not shocking, just wrong enough to give you pause. Maybe it's a small lie. Maybe it's bending a rule. Maybe it's helping with something that sounds off, but you don't want to question it. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's not your responsibility, that someone else knows better. So you obey, and it doesn't feel like a big deal. Nothing terrible happens. The world stays the same. You keep your job. You stay in your group. You don't make waves. A week passes. The request escalates. Slightly worse, slightly more obvious. You hesitate again, just a little longer this time. But the voice is calm, friendly, even, reassuring. It tells you everyone else is doing it, that it's temporary, that it's necessary. And again, you obey, because the alternative would be uncomfortable. To say no would mean raising questions, being seen, being judged. It would mean standing alone, and standing alone is far more terrifying than being wrong. So you let yourself believe what you're told. You push away the discomfort, bury it under rationalizations. You tell yourself there must be a reason, even if you don't know it. You tell yourself it's not really your fault, that someone else would have done it if you hadn't, that you're still a good person. But what if the requests keep coming? What if the line keeps moving? And every time you step just 1 inch further, every time you tell yourself it's the last time, but the voice is still calm, still friendly. It thanks you. It says you're doing the right thing. You start to notice a pattern, not in the orders, but in your reactions. But how each time you feel less resistance, less fear, less guilt, until one day you do something you would have sworn you'd never do. And it doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like momentum, like sliding down a slope you didn't realize you were on. Now imagine looking back at that first moment, the first small act, the tiny wrong you justified. Do you still think it was harmless? You want to believe you'd notice, that you'd resist, that you'd ask questions. But history doesn't support that belief. Again and again, ordinary people have followed terrible orders, not because they were evil, not because they enjoyed it, but because saying no would have meant risking everything: comfort, status, safety. Because they believed someone else must know what they're doing. Because they wanted to belong. You think you'd be different, but would you? What if the command came not with threats, but with praise? What if obedience made you feel special, trusted, important? What if your reward was recognition, belonging, approval? Would you still question it, or would you obey? What if the harm wasn't visible? What if the consequences were distant, abstract, delayed? What if the victims were never named? What if you never saw their faces? Would you still care? What if the language was careful, sanitized? What if it was framed as policy, or protocol, or duty? Would you even realize it was wrong? Or would you tell yourself, it's just how things are? And what if after all of it, you were asked why you did it? What would you say? That you were just following orders, that you didn't know, that you didn't have a choice? Would you believe that? Would anyone? Because maybe the truth is harder to admit. Maybe the truth is, you did have a choice, and you chose comfort. You chose silence. You chose belonging over resistance. You chose to obey, not because you had to, but because it was easier. And now that you see it, maybe that's the part that will stay with you. Not the orders, not the actions, but the quiet, creeping realization that the real danger isn't the voice giving commands, it's the part of you that wanted to listen. There's a child in front of you, not someone you know, not someone famous or powerful, just a person, small, ordinary, unaware. They haven't done anything wrong. They're not connected to anyone important. Their absence wouldn't change history. If they vanished, the world would keep moving. But there's a condition. If this one innocent person dies, if you kill them, world hunger ends forever. No more children starving. No more desperate parents. No more mass graves, or bloated stomachs, or desperate empty cries. It ends. Permanently. Irreversibly. And you're the only one who can do it. No one else knows. No one else can decide. It's your hands. Your choice. One life for millions. One death for the survival of an entire species. You think about the logic. The numbers. You know what makes sense. One life against hundreds of millions isn't even a question mathematically. It's the most efficient, most effective act you could ever take. You'd be ending the worst form of suffering in human history, and all it would cost is one. But you can already feel your chest tighten, because this person is standing right in front of you, looking at you, not afraid, not pleading, just there, human. And that's the problem, isn't it? It's easy to make moral calculations in abstract. It's easy to talk about trade-offs and sacrifices when the lives are faceless, far away, theoretical. But now the cost is breathing. The cost has a pulse. The cost might flinch when you reach out. You're not just saving lives, you're ending one with full awareness. And that awareness doesn't go away. You wonder what kind of person you'd have to be to do it. Strong? Cold? Brave? Evil? You tell yourself you wouldn't enjoy it, that it would haunt you, that it wouldn't make you a monster. But if it haunts you forever, can you really call it the right thing? Would you spend the rest of your life knowing peace was built on blood, that the end of suffering came through your violence? You start to rationalize. Maybe they would have died anyway. Maybe their life wouldn't have been meaningful. Maybe their death gives them a kind of cosmic significance, a sacrifice that saved humanity. Maybe, but you know you're lying. You're searching for excuses because the truth is unbearable. You think about waiting, refusing, hoping someone else finds another solution. But the opportunity doesn't wait. It's now. It's only you. Refuse, and the suffering continues. Not because of a failure of science or politics, but because you said no. Could you live with that? Every famine, every death, every starving cry that follows, it echoes back to you. You were given the power to stop it, and you chose not to. You start to realize something darker, that the real horror isn't the killing. It's what it reveals about your limits. You're afraid that you might do it, that you're capable of stepping over that line, that your desire to be good, to avoid becoming a killer, could be weaker than your desire to fix the world. And if that's true, then what are you? A savior, a murderer, something in between? Or worse, what if you couldn't do it? What if, when the moment came, you froze? What if your morality was just fear disguised as principle? What if you let millions starve just to protect your image of yourself as someone who would never kill? Would that be moral or cowardice? Now the question twists again. This isn't just about the life of one person. It's about your identity, your self-concept, your place in a world that dares you to choose between impossible outcomes, and the weight of that choice doesn't go away. If you kill, you live with what you've done. If you don't, you live with what you allowed. There is no version of you that escapes unchanged. You wonder if anyone else would know, if the world would ever thank you, if the people who lived because of your choice would even suspect, but they wouldn't. No one would. You'd carry the silence alone, the weight of millions lifted with one act no one could ever speak of. And maybe that's what makes it unbearable. Not the death, not the guilt, but the isolation, the knowledge that no one else would know what it cost, that no one else would see the wound inside you. And now you understand that the question isn't whether you would kill to end world hunger. The question is whether you could live afterward. You remember things that never happened, not just small things, not just details, entire events, moments, conversations. You're sure they're real. You'd bet your life on it, and you'd be wrong. Your memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain rewrites it, not randomly, not neutrally, with purpose, with bias, with survival in mind. You think you remember your childhood clearly. You don't. What you remember is a version your mind crafted to make you feel okay, to keep you functioning. Maybe your parents weren't as kind as you remember. Maybe you weren't as innocent. But you couldn't handle that truth then. So your brain adjusted the story, softened the edges, repainted the violence as discipline, the neglect as independence. You don't notice it happening. It doesn't ask for permission. It just does it, quietly, efficiently, to protect you. Think about that for a second. The self you believe you are, the one shaped by your memories, may be based on lies. Lies you told yourself. Lies your brain created so you could keep waking up without breaking. You may believe you were always the victim. You may believe you always tried your best. You may believe you were betrayed, misunderstood, or pure in your intentions. And maybe you were. But how would you know? If your mind is actively editing your past for emotional survival, how can you trust any of it? And what if this isn't rare? What if it's constant? What if every memory you revisit becomes less about truth and more about preserving your narrative, your identity, your sense of goodness? Think about the things you've done that you're ashamed of. The way you tell those stories now. You leave out certain parts. You add context. You reframe. Not just out loud, but in your head too. You start believing the edited version. Over time, the original disappears. And now you don't even know what you're hiding from. You just feel better. Safer. But safe from what? From the possibility that you hurt someone, that you caused real damage, that you were cruel, that you made a choice not out of necessity, but out of selfishness or fear, that you weren't a good person in that moment, and that maybe you're not as good as you think now. Your brain knows what to erase, what to blur, what to amplify. It filters the past like a surgeon, cutting away the parts that would make you sick, leave you sleepless, unravel your sense of self. But there's a cost, because if you can't remember your own darkness, you can't change it. If you can't see what you were really capable of, you'll never know what you still are. You'll keep thinking of yourself as someone who would never, until one day you do. And then you'll rewrite that too. Again and again. You start to wonder how much of your life is fabricated, not by others, but by you. How many friendships fell apart, not because of what they did, but because of what you don't remember doing. How many apologies you never gave, because the offense was deleted. How many moments you claimed as unjust when you were the one holding the knife. And the scariest part is, you don't feel like you're lying. You feel certain. You feel honest. That's how deep the edits go. They don't just hide the truth. They rewrite your feelings to match. So you believe them, without question. You become someone you can live with, not someone real, just someone survivable. And that's what makes it so disturbing. The mind doesn't protect you with truth. It protects you with illusion, and you believe it because the alternative is unbearable. But what if you want the truth? What if you want to remember clearly, even if it hurts? You can try. You can interrogate your memories. Dig for inconsistencies. Ask yourself what you might be leaving out. But you'll feel resistance. You'll feel confusion. Your own mind will fight you, because it's not designed for truth. It's designed for coherence, stability, psychological safety. And maybe you'll never know what really happened. Not exactly. Not cleanly. Maybe you'll only ever have fragments, possibilities. and a growing awareness that the past you live with isn't the one you lived through. And then you're left with a haunting realization. If your memories aren't real, then neither is the person you think you are. What if your parents aren't real? Not in the sense that they're illusions or ghosts or robots, but in the deeper sense, the unsettling possibility that everything you think you know about them, who they are, what they feel, what they mean to you, might not be true. You've built your entire self around a story that was never proven, a set of faces, voices, gestures that you accepted without question, but you never verified anything. You couldn't. You remember their touch, their voice, the way they looked at you when you were hurt, or proud, or lost. These moments feel real. They feel definitive, but they're all internal, all filtered through your perception, your memories, your mind, and your mind is fallible. It fills in gaps. It tells stories. It makes meaning where there might be none. You've never seen their past, only heard it, glimpsed it through old photos, vague anecdotes, stories told in casual tones, but you never lived it. You can't confirm it, you just accepted it, because children have no choice. They are handed a reality before they're old enough to question it. What if none of it holds up? What if the people who raised you weren't what they seemed, not maliciously, just incompletely? A role performed, a set of expectations fulfilled. You called them mother, father, but what do those titles really mean when everything you know about them depends on trust? Stories about who you were, how you behaved, what you loved, what you feared. You didn't remember most of it, but you believed them. They said you were quiet as a baby. They said you hated carrots. They said you cried at night until you heard their voices. But you don't remember these things. You just inherited them like facts. You made them part of yourself. But what if they were wrong, or lying, or confused, or projecting? What if their version of you, the one they raised, is a fiction? What if they shaped you not based on who you were, but on who they needed you to be? And what if you've done the same to them? You say your mother is kind, or distant, or anxious, or strong. You say your father is logical, or cold, or dependable, or withdrawn. But these aren't truths, they're impressions. You've never known them outside of their role in your life. You never saw who they were when they were alone. You never met the full version of them, just the version they allowed you to see. Can you really say you know them? You don't know what they think when they look at you. Not really. You've heard words, you've seen expressions. You fatches one too solven your ways ever. But internal lives don't translate cleanly to the outside. You felt misunderstood before, misread. So have they. How many moments between you were colored by wrong assumptions, missed signals, imagined meanings? They loved you. You're sure of that. But even love is not proof. Love is a word we use to name a feeling, and feelings are interpretations, chemicals, contexts, reactions to needs, to fears, to roles we believe we're supposed to play. And you've never stepped outside the frame long enough to question it. Because to question it feels wrong, feels disloyal, feels ungrateful. But now you realize that not questioning it has a cost. It traps you inside a story you never wrote. A story you were born into, without permission, without clarity, without proof. And now try something harder. What if they don't exist the way you think they do? What if your memories of them are distorted? What if the voices in your mind, the ones you hear when you remember their advice, or their anger, or their comfort? What if those voices aren't theirs anymore? What if they're yours, wearing their mask? You carry them with you, their expectations, their disappointment, their approval. But how much of that is real, and how much of it is a projection, something you've internalized so deeply, you forgot it was once outside of you? If your parents are still alive, you can call them. see them, hear their words. But even then, you're interacting with an idea, a version of them that has been shaped by years of interpretation, misunderstanding, forgetting, and assuming. If they're gone, then it's even less clear. You carry their absence like a presence. You speak to them in your head. You imagine what they'd say, but you don't know. You never did. And that's what unsettles you now. Not that they lied, not that they failed, but that your certainty was always fragile. That your foundation was built on memory, interpretation, emotion, and repetition, not truth. That the people you've anchored your identity to may never have existed the way you believed they did. And if that's true, what does that make you? Would you let someone you love suffer just to protect a belief? Not a stranger, not an idea, someone close, someone real, someone who trusts you. Picture them now, their voice, their face, the way they look at you when they're scared. Imagine them begging you to stop. Not because you're hurting them, but because you're letting something else hurt them and doing nothing. Because if you intervened, if you stepped in, you'd have to admit you were wrong. You'd have to let go of something you believe, something you've clung to for years, a belief that defines who you are. Could you do it? What if the belief is about justice, about truth, about what's right? Maybe it's religious, or political, or philosophical. Maybe it's just the way you think the world should be. And now it's being tested, not in theory, not in debate, but through the pain of someone you love. They're being harmed by the consequences of that belief. Not abstractly, not hypothetically. They're bleeding, unraveling, right in front of you. And you know that if you stepped away from the belief, if you rejected it, or even questioned it, you could stop the damage, you could help them, you could save them. But something in you resists. Because what does it mean to abandon the belief? What does it say about you? About everything you've defended, everything you've judged others for? Would you rather protect the belief and lose them? You might tell yourself it's not that simple, that you're not responsible, that it's not the belief hurting them. It's the world, or their weakness, or bad luck. But that's not true. You know it's not. You know it's your refusal to reconsider, your refusal to bend, your refusal to put their pain above your pride. You might even say you're helping them, that standing firm will teach them something, that one day they'll see you were right. But deep down you know that's just a story you use to avoid the guilt. Because the truth is, you're not choosing the belief because it's right. You're choosing it because it's safe, because it lets you avoid the terror of being wrong. Because if this belief is false, then what else have you misunderstood? What else have you done that you can't justify? So you stay. You hold the belief tight, and the person you love suffers quietly in its shadow. And they wait for you to see them, for you to reach out, for you to choose them over the thing that's hurting them. But you don't. You can't, because love asks you to change. Belief demands you stay the same, and you choose belief, even when it costs everything. Maybe you tell yourself that love should survive disagreement, that if they truly loved you, they wouldn't ask you to change. But maybe that's just another shield, another way to hide, because they never ask you to agree with them. They only wanted you to see their pain, and you looked away. You sacrificed their safety to protect your certainty. You sacrificed trust for ideology. You sacrificed love to protect a belief. And the worst part is, you'll probably never admit it. You'll say they pulled away, that they couldn't handle disagreement, that they chose division, not you. But the truth will always be simpler. They were in pain, and you watched, and you did nothing. What if your kindness isn't kindness at all? What if it's fear, quiet, constant fear, disguised as virtue? You say something nice. You offer help. You smile, nod, Agree. But beneath every gesture, there's a tension, a calculation, a small, desperate hope that this person will like you, accept you, not turn away. You act like you care, but maybe what you really care about is not being rejected. You've been taught that being good means being kind, that kindness is selfless, that it comes from compassion. But look closer, notice the discomfort you feel when someone is upset with you. Notice how quickly you soften, apologize, withdraw. You tell yourself it's empathy, but maybe it's something simpler. Maybe it's fear. You don't want to be disliked. You don't want to be seen as rude, selfish, difficult. You want to be safe, and being kind makes you safe. People who are kind don't get punished. People who are kind don't get excluded. People who are kind are harder to hate. But if your kindness is just a shield, if it's just a way to avoid conflict, to keep others close, to protect your image, then what does that make it? If you're generous because you fear being called selfish, if you're polite because silence makes you feel exposed, if you're agreeable because disagreement feels dangerous, then is that really goodness, or is it performance? And if it's performance, who are you performing for? Most people never notice this. They live their lives believing their kindness is pure. But purity doesn't flinch when someone disapproves. Purity doesn't retreat the moment kindness isn't rewarded. Purity doesn't crumble when someone calls you out. Your kindness does. You say yes when you mean no. You smile when you're angry. You offer when you feel resentful. You call it being nice, being mature, being a good person. But maybe you're just scared of what happens when you're honest, scared of who might walk away. And this fear runs deeper than you admit. It starts early. You learn quickly that approval is survival. Praise gets you love. Agreement gets you safety. So you learn to become what others need. You learn to shape your voice, your face, your feelings to match what will be accepted. And then you forget that you're doing it. But it doesn't disappear. It leaks out in your tone, your fatigue, your quiet resentment. You give too much and then feel bitter. You comfort others, then feel unseen. You listen endlessly, then wonder why no one listens to you. You tell yourself you're kind, but inside you're tired. Not from caring, but from hiding, because fear wears you down. Performing goodness is exhausting, and every time you silence a truth to protect someone else's opinion of you, you disappear a little more. Ask yourself, what would your kindness look like if you weren't afraid? If you knew you could be disliked and still be okay? If you could disappoint someone without crumbling, would your kindness still exist? Would it look the same? Maybe not. Maybe some of it would disappear. Maybe what's left wouldn't be as polished. Maybe it would be sharper, more honest, more real. Maybe your kindness wouldn't be soft and sweet. Maybe it would be hard and uncomfortable. But maybe it would finally be yours. Because real kindness doesn't come from fear. It doesn't need to be liked. It doesn't beg for approval. It exists even when no one sees it. Even when it gets nothing in return. But your kindness, the one you practice most days, doesn't feel that way. It feels anxious. It feels fragile, like a mask that slips the moment someone disapproves. And here's the part that stings. The people you think you're protecting with your kindness. They can feel it. They sense the tension. They notice the distance. They don't see warmth. They see avoidance. They don't see generosity. They see self-preservation. So the connection you're trying to preserve through kindness never really forms. It's hollow, conditional. It only lasts as long as your fear is managed. And when the fear grows too loud or the performance too heavy, the kindness collapses and you're left alone, wondering why no one understands you, why your goodness wasn't enough. But maybe it wasn't goodness. Maybe it was just survival, and maybe you don't need to be liked to be whole. Maybe you don't need to perform to be kind. Maybe the part of you that's most afraid of being hated is the part that has never once been allowed to be seen. What if every answer you find takes something from you? Not knowledge itself, but what it replaces, the part of you that believed in something simple, something sacred. Each time you understand a little more about how the world works, how your mind works, how people really are, you feel it. The ground shifts slightly. The warmth recedes. The sense of being someone understandable, someone whole, fades. You notice it most when you're alone. You look at yourself, not with pride, but with detachment. Like you're observing a machine, learning to mimic humanity. You say the right things, smile at the right times. But inside, something doesn't quite connect. As if knowledge didn't build you. It hollowed you out. It starts subtly. You learn why people behave the way they do. You study psychology, biology, trauma, influence. You begin to see patterns, explain motives. At first it feels empowering. You finally understand why things happen, why people hurt each other, why they lie, why they love. But then something changes. The mystery disappears. You stop feeling awe and start seeing mechanisms. You don't hear someone's story and feel empathy. You analyze. Their pain becomes a data point. Their joy becomes a stimulus-response loop. You don't mean to do it. You just can't unsee the machinery. And slowly, your own emotions start to feel artificial. You cry and wonder if it's real crying, or if you've just internalized the right cues. You laugh and question if you're responding naturally or performing the script. You touch someone's hand and wonder if you're feeling intimacy or mimicking it. The more you know about yourself, the more fragmented you feel. You dissect your own memories, deconstruct your desires, trace every impulse back to some chemical or evolutionary drive. You try to find the authentic you, but the more layers you peel back, the less there is. At some point you realize you were never uncovering yourself. You were dissolving. Knowledge doesn't make you feel more human. It makes you feel like a system. Your kindness, your morality, your beliefs, they don't feel sacred anymore. They feel like functions, like code, adaptations. You don't hold them because they're true. You hold them because they kept your ancestors alive. Even love, once felt as something holy, begins to look different. You see the hormones, the projections, the mutual dependencies dressed up as romance. You don't stop loving, but it changes, becomes quieter, sharper, less magical, and that hurts more than you expected. You tell yourself this clarity is a gift, that it's better to see things as they are. But what you don't admit is how lonely it feels. To sit in a room full of people and feel like you're the only one who knows the trick. Not because you're smarter, but because you look too far, too deep. You begin to envy ignorance. Not stupidity, but the softness that comes with not needing to know. The ability to believe in meaning without dissecting it. To feel without analysis. To live without standing one layer outside your own skin, watching. You don't go back. You can't. Once the veil lifts, it never returns. You keep learning, keep unraveling, and every answer you gain subtracts something you didn't know you'd miss, until one day you look in the mirror and see someone who knows a lot and feels very little. Not numb, not broken, just slightly removed, slightly less alive, slightly less human. What if everyone started telling the truth? All at once. No more white lies, no more social niceties, no more tactful omissions, just complete honesty. Every thought, every feeling, every judgment spoken aloud, without filter, without pause, you might think it would be liberating. Finally, free from deception, manipulation, misunderstanding. A society where nothing is hidden, where everyone knows exactly where they stand. But imagine it for real. You ask your partner if they still love you. They pause, then say, "I'm not sure." Your friend asks what you think of their new job, and you tell them you think it's beneath them. Pointless. A coworker asks why you didn't invite them out last night. You say it's because you don't really enjoy their company. A child asks if they're talented, and you say, "No, not really." This is what it means to build a society on truth, not selective truth, not kind truth, not useful truth, just truth. And it breaks everything, because truth isn't neutral. It cuts, it isolates, it destroys illusions that people need to survive. The illusion that they are loved without condition, that they are respected, even when they fail, that they are safe from judgment in their most vulnerable moments. We build relationships on these illusions, friendships, families, nations, a web of shared fictions that keep us connected, cooperative, stable. Tear that web down, and what's left is not clarity, it's chaos. A leader is asked why they started a war. They say it was for money, for power, not protection, not peace. A teacher admits they have favorites. A judge confesses personal bias. A doctor reveals indifference to the suffering of their patients. Institutions crumble under truth because they depend on belief. Belief in fairness, in competence, in compassion. Without those beliefs, trust disappears. And without trust, nothing holds. Truth reveals how selfish we are, how tribal, how afraid. It shows the lies we tell, not just to others, but to ourselves, that we're good people, that we're in control, that our lives have meaning. A society that values only truth can't tolerate comfort. And people need comfort more than they need honesty. That's why most of what we call truth is actually curated, filtered, wrapped in softness. The truth you can handle, not the one that's real. We tell each other stories because the full truth is too brutal to share and too dangerous to live by. Consider how often peace is maintained by silence. How many conflicts are avoided, not by resolution, but by pretending there's nothing wrong. A glance, a nod, a quiet agreement to let things slide. Now imagine removing that option. Imagine being forced to say exactly what you think, exactly when you think it. Every irritation, every suspicion, every private betrayal exposed. Friendships would die, families would fracture, workplaces would implode. Not because people are evil, but because we are fragile, and truth isn't gentle. Even the truths we tell ourselves are selective. You don't wake up every morning thinking of your worst failures. You focus on progress, on hope, on the parts of yourself you like. Full honesty with yourself would paralyze you. You wouldn't move. You wouldn't try. A society built on truth wouldn't create progress. It would collapse under its own weight. You might think truth would bring justice, but it wouldn't. It would bring exposure. Everyone guilty of something. Everyone flawed. Everyone judged. And in a world where everyone is guilty, no one is safe. We want to believe truth is a foundation, something solid to build on. But the truth isn't stable. It shifts. It contradicts. It depends on context, on perspective. And once spoken, it can't be unsaid. It becomes a weapon, a scar. This is why we lie. Not because we're corrupt, but because we're trying to survive. Lies are the threads that hold our social fabric together, carefully chosen, delicately maintained. Pull one too hard and the whole thing unravels. We don't build society on truth. We build it on the appearance of truth, on shared beliefs that feel true enough, safe enough, believable enough to keep us going. And maybe that's the real reason we fear full honesty. Not because we'd lose others, but because we'd lose the version of ourselves we've spent so long trying to believe in. And once that version is gone, There's nothing to protect us from who we really are, nothing to protect anyone. What if you enjoy watching people suffer? Not just in fiction, not just in passing, but quietly, consistently, without acknowledging it, even to yourself. You'd deny it, of course. You'd say you care, that suffering makes you uncomfortable, that cruelty disturbs you. You'd insist you're one of the good ones, but then you think about what grabs your attention, what pulls your eyes to the screen, what makes you stop scrolling. It's rarely joy, it's rarely peace. You watch fights on the street and call it curiosity. You follow true crime cases and call it justice. You watch people break down on reality shows and call it drama. You stare at pain, dressed up as entertainment, and never ask why. And when someone truly breaks, when someone truly suffers, when a voice cracks, or a body collapses, or a secret spills out at the worst possible moment, there's something inside you that sharpens. You lean in, just slightly, and then you pretend you didn't. You think it's about empathy, that you feel bad for them, that your discomfort proves you care. But if it truly hurt to see others suffer, would you keep watching? Would the algorithms feed you more if you weren't always clicking? You think it's different because you're not cheering for it. You're not the one causing it. But what if that doesn't matter? What if the difference between watching and wanting isn't as clear as you'd like to believe? You tell yourself it's human nature to be curious, but curiosity doesn't explain why you enjoy the fallout more than the resolution, why you replay the moment of collapse, not the moment of healing, why apologies are forgettable, but humiliation sticks. You say it's just content, just stories, but you remember the pain, you remember the faces, you remember the screams and the silence that followed. You think it's harmless, but it shapes how you see people. Slowly, subtly, watching them reduced, degraded, broken again and again, until part of you forgets how fragile they really are, or how similar to you. And the worst part is, you're not alone. Millions watch, quietly. An audience of strangers nodding along, all pretending they're disturbed, while staying just long enough to watch it happen again. You start to wonder if shame is the only thing keeping us from admitting how much we like it. How good it feels to not be the one in pain. How safe you feel when someone else is falling apart. That sense of safety is addictive, because in someone else's suffering you see a relief, a distance, a buffer between your life and theirs. You remind yourself that at least it's not happening to you, at least you're still standing, at least you're still whole, and maybe that's the real pleasure, not the suffering itself, but what it confirms that you're still intact, that you're still okay. And if that's true, if someone else's collapse helps you feel stronger, safer, more in control, then maybe you're not just a passive observer. Maybe you're complicit. Not through action, through attention, through interest, through quiet satisfaction that it's their life unraveling, not yours. And if someone offered you a choice, watch someone suffer, just a little, to make your day feel better, how often would you take it? How often have you already taken it, without realizing? And how much of your morality depends on never having to admit it? Would you swap places with a death row inmate to test fairness? Not because you think they're innocent, not because you believe in sacrifice, but because you want to know, truly know, if the system that condemned them is fair. You'd be taking their place. Yes, their sentence, their cell, their final walk, but not forever. Just long enough to feel what they feel, to see if the process that judged them could ever withstand the weight of your own body inside it. You'd be them, legally, temporarily. Everything about your identity would be erased for the duration. No one would know it's a test. No one would treat you differently. You'd be processed, confined, watched. You'd hear the same doors slam shut. You'd eat the same food. You'd sleep in the same silence. And eventually, you'd be led to the same execution chamber until the test ends and you're pulled out. You'd live their punishment without their crime, all to find out if the sentence fits. Would you do it? At first it feels ridiculous. Who would volunteer for that? But then again, if a system is truly fair, shouldn't it withstand scrutiny? If death row is just, it shouldn't matter who experiences it. The outcome should still make sense, still feel earned. But what if it doesn't? What if the moment you enter the cell, you feel something shift? What if the rules, the silence, the gaze of the guards start to press against you in a way you never expected? What if the certainty begins to unravel? You told yourself you believed in justice, that guilt and innocence are clear, that punishment has meaning. But now you're here, in their place, and suddenly it feels different. Not because you're innocent, but because you're no longer watching, you're inside. And maybe that's the point. Maybe fairness only feels fair from the outside, when you're detached, when you're safe. But once the system closes around you, you start to feel how uneven it really is. The waiting, the isolation, the slow erasure of your sense of time, of identity, of humanity. You thought it would feel clinical, rational. Instead, it feels slow, heavy, brutal, in ways that statistics never explain. And now you wonder if this is what justice feels like from the inside. Is it still justice? You start to think about the person who was here before you, the one you replaced. You picture them pacing in this same space, breathing the same recycled air, listening to the same echoes. And now you wonder if the system ever saw them clearly or just processed them, sorted them, discarded them. Was it justice, or was it convenience dressed up as morality? And then you ask yourself the harder question. If this were permanent, if you weren't being pulled out at the end, would you still call it fair? Maybe that's the real test. Not whether the punishment matches the crime, but whether you'd still believe in it when your life is the one being counted, when your future is the one being erased. Could you sit in that cell, knowing the people outside believe you deserve it? Could you hear the guards speak your name with casual detachment, knowing that every day they see you as already gone? You think about the court, the trial, the judge, the jury. You try to picture them looking at you and deciding that this was the correct outcome, that you belong here, that this is justice. And for a moment you feel something terrifying, not anger, not fear, but doubt, a crack in your certainty. A quiet, creeping sense that the whole system might be less about fairness and more about finality, about closing the book, about making pain disappear by transferring it onto a body that can no longer speak. Would you still believe in the sentence, knowing how it feels from the inside? Would you still trust the system, knowing how little it trusts you once you're within it? Maybe the test isn't about fairness at all. Maybe it's about exposure, about revealing that the very idea of justice begins to collapse, when the person judged is no longer a concept, but a body that looks and sounds like you. And now you understand why this thought experiment exists. It's not to test the inmate, it's to test you. Not to see if you're willing to die, but to see if you're willing to feel, willing to stand inside the machine and ask if it's really working the way you thought it was. Because fairness should survive contact. It should survive scrutiny. It should survive the weight of your presence. And if it doesn't, if the moment you become the one inside the cell, everything starts to feel wrong, then maybe it was never fairness to begin with. Maybe it was just distance. You get a call in the middle of the night. Police. Calm, professional, certain. They tell you there's been a murder. The suspect is in custody, and they give you a name. Your name. You laugh at first, assuming a mistake. A misprint. But they're serious. They have footage, witnesses, DNA. Everything matches. And when you arrive, still unsure if you're dreaming, you see them, sitting in the interrogation room, calm, upright, hands folded. It's you, not someone who looks like you, not a distant resemblance. It's perfect. Every feature, every scar, every memory, a complete match. They smile when they see you, like they've been expecting this moment. The officers glance between you, confused. Their forensics team is certain. Same fingerprints, same blood type, same genetic structure. But now there are two of you, identical in every measurable way. Only one committed the crime. But how can anyone tell which one? You insist on your innocence. You swear you didn't do it. But so do they. The clone, the copy. They claim you are the imposter, that they're the original. And you both have proof. Same childhood memories, same family, same relationships. Every alibi overlaps. Every reference checks out. The system collapses. It was built to handle deception, not duplication. You begin to feel something you've never felt before, uncertainty about your own identity. Because if there is another you, exact in thought, memory, instinct, what exactly makes you real? You try to cling to your uniqueness, your life, your actions. But the clone shares all of them, until the moment of the crime. That's when the timelines diverged. That's when you became two different people. Before that, you were indistinguishable. After that, only one of you changed. But if your clone did it, and you share the same brain, the same wiring, the same tendencies, what separates you from them? Is the difference real or just circumstantial? You want to believe you'd never do what they did. But until that moment, were you. Same thoughts, same fears, same beliefs. So what changed? And how can you be sure you wouldn't have done the same, given the same push? You start asking yourself things you never asked before. What if the only reason you're not the killer is that someone else got there first? What if all that separates you from murder is timing? You try to reassure yourself. You're not responsible. You didn't act. But the clone did. And the clone is you. Just a few hours removed. Does that mean you're still innocent? Or are you guilty of the potential to be them? People around you don't know what to believe. Friends hesitate. Co-workers keep their distance. Even your family starts to look at you differently. Not with hatred, just doubt. Quiet, uneasy doubt. You begin to feel it too. A slow unraveling. You start seeing yourself not as one person, but two paths, two outcomes. One of them ended in blood, and the only reason it wasn't you is luck. A roll of the dice. You wonder if a perfect version of you chose to kill. Does that mean the capacity was always there, hidden inside you, waiting? The clone is eventually taken away, sentenced, imprisoned. Justice served, they say. But something stays with you. The thought that somewhere out there, locked in a cell, is someone who is you. Not metaphorically, literally. Same voice, same thoughts, same potential. And the only thing that proves you're not guilty is that it happened to them instead. You pass a mirror and flinch. You hear your voice and don't trust it. You watch your hands and wonder what they're capable of, because you're no longer sure who you are. Not completely. And maybe the worst part isn't knowing your clone committed murder. It's knowing that when they did, it felt like a part of you went with them. You lie more than you think you do, not just to others, but to yourself. Quietly, constantly, automatically. And the worst part is, you believe it. You believe you're honest. You believe your choices are rational. You believe you're the kind of person who tells the truth, even when it's hard. But inside your brain, something else is happening. Something older. deeper, something not concerned with truth at all. Your brain is wired to protect you, and sometimes that protection looks like denial. You make a mistake, but you convince yourself it wasn't really your fault. You hurt someone, but you reframe it so that it doesn't seem so bad. You tell yourself you had no other choice, that your intentions were good, that they misunderstood. You smooth the rough edges of reality, not because you're evil or manipulative, but because that's how the brain defends its own narrative. And the longer you do it, the more real it feels. Over time, the story shifts, the details blur, memory bends, until the version of events you carry in your head no longer matches what really happened. And yet, it feels completely true. You forget that you forgot, and the lie becomes invisible. Now imagine this happening, not just once, but constantly, a slow, imperceptible drift away from reality. Tiny adjustments, barely noticeable, each one making you feel a little more consistent, a little more justified, a little more in control. You don't notice it happening. You don't feel dishonest. You feel sane. You feel right. But you aren't, because your mind isn't built for accuracy. It's built for survival. And truth isn't always what helps you survive. Sometimes the truth makes you freeze. So your mind tells you it's fine. Sometimes the truth makes you feel powerless. So your mind tells you there's nothing you could have done. Sometimes the truth threatens your identity. So your mind changes the story, just enough to protect your sense of who you are. And the more intelligent you are, the better you are at rationalizing, at weaving the lie so tightly into your thoughts that you don't even know it's there. You're not deceiving others. You're deceiving yourself. And that deception feels like safety. It keeps your self-image intact. It shields you from guilt. It prevents you from collapsing under the weight of your own contradictions. But eventually, something breaks. Someone calls you out. A relationship falls apart. A pattern repeats that you can't explain. And for a brief moment, you glimpse something terrifying, that you are not who you thought you were. That the story you've told yourself about your past, your choices, your intentions might be wrong. But that's unbearable. So your mind doubles down. It finds ways to explain the discomfort, to dismiss the evidence, to reshape the memory one more time. And you believe it, because your brain wants to, not because it's the truth. And now, imagine this. What if every person you've ever met is doing the same thing? What if every belief, every conviction, every story someone tells about who they are is built partly on lies they don't even know they've told? What if no one is seeing reality clearly? Not even the ones who think they are, especially not them. And what if that includes you? You like to think you're self-aware, that you've confronted your past honestly, that you've looked at yourself without flinching, but you haven't. No one has. Not fully. Like, 'cause self-deception isn't a flaw. It's a feature. It keeps you functional. It keeps you going. But it also keeps you blind. Blind to your patterns. Blind to your responsibility. Blind to the ways you quietly bend reality to protect your pride, your comfort, your sense of meaning. And the hardest part is that you'll never fully know where the lies begin, because the mind doesn't label them. It doesn't mark a thought as distorted or false or self-serving. It just feels true, and that feeling, that certainty, is what traps you. Because the more certain you feel, the less likely you are to question it. And the more lies you've told yourself, the more fragile you become. Because somewhere deep down, you know the truth is in there, buried. And if you ever dig too deep, everything else might fall apart. Would you still believe them if their face made you uncomfortable? Think about how quickly you decide someone is trustworthy. A glance, a smile, a shape of the eyes. It happens almost instantly. before you even know it's happening. You look at a stranger and something inside you either relaxes or doesn't. And what's disturbing isn't just how fast this happens. It's what it's based on, not their actions, not their words, not anything they've done, just how they look. We want to believe we judge character, not appearance. We want to believe that trust is earned, not felt. But your brain doesn't wait for evidence. It takes shortcuts. It sees symmetry, softness, youth and smooth skin, and it calls that good. It sees harshness, imbalance, or signs of age, and it calls that dangerous. You don't mean to do this. It doesn't feel like judgment. It feels like instinct, but it's not. It's conditioning. Patterns learned through repetition, reinforced by stories, media, memory. You've seen the same faces again and again, playing the hero, the victim, the kind stranger. So when you meet someone who looks like them, you trust them, automatically, without thought. And when you meet someone who doesn't, something inside you pulls away. You don't hate them, you just don't move toward them. You stay neutral, you stay safe. You feel nothing, and that lack of warmth, that tiny emotional gap, is all it takes. Because trust doesn't need proof. It only needs comfort, and comfort is tied to beauty. Not just physical beauty, but the kind that aligns with what you expect, what you're used to, what's familiar. You're more likely to believe someone if they look the way you think good people should look. You're more likely to doubt someone if they don't, even if they say the same words, even if they act the same way. And it goes deeper than you realize. In a courtroom, an attractive defendant is more likely to be found innocent. In a job interview, a more attractive candidate is assumed to be more competent. Even children, before they've learned language, prefer to look at faces that adults would call beautiful. And still we insist we're fair, that we're rational, that we give everyone a chance. But how can you give someone a fair chance when your brain is already leaning toward one side? And what does it mean to be trusted when that trust wasn't earned, just given freely based on your appearance? If people assume you're good just because you're beautiful, does that change how you act? Does it shape your morality? Do you become better, or just better at being believed? And if you're not attractive, if people treat you with caution or coldness, do you become what they expect? Do you withdraw? Do you start to resent the world for something you never chose? How many people carry the weight of being seen as less safe, less honest, less kind, simply because of how their face is shaped? And what happens when beauty fades? When age, illness, or time changes? What people see. If your kindness was once accepted easily, and now it's met with suspicion, what does that do to your sense of self? What does it reveal about the people around you? You begin to realize that trust isn't something we give fairly. It's not a reward for integrity. It's a reaction, a feeling, a snap judgment based on nothing real. And once that feeling is there, everything else bends around it. We justify our bias. We find reasons to believe the people we already feel comfortable with. We find flaws in the ones we don't. So when you say someone gives you a bad vibe, what are you really reacting to? Their behavior, or their face, their character, or their appearance? It's easy to claim instinct. It's harder to admit prejudice, especially when it's unconscious, especially when it feels natural. But what if you reversed it? What if every attractive person made you feel uneasy? What if every beautiful face triggered your suspicion instead of your trust? How would that change your world? Would you still be drawn to them? Would you still give them the benefit of the doubt? And what if someone told you the truth, but looked like a liar? Would you believe them? Or would your discomfort override your logic? The terrifying part isn't that you trust beauty. It's that you can't help it. You see a man crushed under falling rubble. His leg is twisted, his face contorted, his scream cutting through you like glass. You wince. You feel it in your chest. You look away because something inside of you recoils, automatic, primal. Now picture a video game, a digital character. You shoot him in the head. He collapses, pixels splattering in a familiar red pattern. No part of you flinches. There's no guilt, no hesitation. You may even feel a flicker of satisfaction, a small reward. The kill felt clean. Why is that? It's easy to say the difference is obvious. One is real, one isn't. But that explanation hides something deeper. Because your body reacts before your thoughts do. Before you remember what's real and what isn't. Your empathy either ignites or stays silent. Which means something inside you is choosing what counts as suffering and what doesn't. Ask yourself this: how do you know what someone else is feeling? You don't see their pain. You see their face. You hear their voice. You watch their body move. All of it interpreted through patterns you've learned over years. You feel their pain because your brain simulates it. But only if you believe it matters. That's the difference. You've trained your mind to dismiss certain signals. If it's a screen, if it's animated, if it's labeled fiction, your empathy shuts down. The signals still enter your eyes, but they're rerouted, discarded, stripped of emotional weight. Pain becomes decoration. Suffering becomes scenery. Now imagine this. You watch a live stream. A person you've never met stumbles, breaks down, begins sobbing. Their voice cracks, their body trembles. And for a moment you feel something. But then your mind reminds you, it's just content. It's far away. It's not your responsibility. The empathy fades. You scroll on, then go deeper. What if the pain is real, but indirect? A factory worker crushed by unsafe equipment. A child starving because of economic policy. A suicide after online harassment. You knew about it. You read it. You felt something. But not for long. Not enough to change anything. Because it wasn't close. Because it didn't speak your language. Because the pain was wrapped in distance and abstraction. And so, like the video game character, it didn't fully count. Now flip it. What if the suffering was digital, but convincingly real? An AI that screams when deleted. A robot that begs for its life. A simulated child that cries when ignored. You know intellectually that none of it is conscious, but your body reacts anyway. Your breath shortens. You hesitate. Because your empathy doesn't wait for facts. It responds to signals. And if the signals are strong enough, they override logic. So then, what is empathy? Really? Is it care for another being, or is it just a pattern recognition system, finely tuned to proximity, similarity, and familiarity? Do you care because someone is suffering, or because they look like someone you've been taught to care about? You start to realize your capacity for empathy isn't moral, it's conditional. And the more abstract the suffering becomes, the easier it is to ignore, even when it's real, even when it matters. You don't feel guilt for letting a digital character die, but you also don't feel guilt for letting a real stranger suffer in silence. Because both are removed, both are filtered, both exist outside the boundary where your empathy activates. That's the uncomfortable part. It's not that you care less about digital pain. It's that you care less about distant pain, about invisible pain, about inconvenient pain. And when you're surrounded by screens, by avatars, by representations instead of people, everything becomes distant. So you live in a world where real suffering happens constantly, and yet you feel more emotion for a broken phone than for a broken life you'll never see. Because the phone is yours, the pain is not. You say you're a good person, that you care, that you want to help. But how much of that is just a performance your empathy puts on when the signals are strong enough? How often do you care only when it's easy? Because maybe the most disturbing truth isn't that you feel less guilt for digital death. It's that you've learned to feel less guilt for real pain. And the difference, increasingly, is just how close you're standing when it happens. What if no one else is real? Not metaphorically, not as a philosophical exercise, just plainly, literally. What if you're the only conscious person alive? The people you see, speak to, love, they move, they react, they respond, but they don't think. Not like you do. They have no inner world, no awareness, no self. They're not lying about it. They simply don't know. Because there's nothing there to know. They function. They pass every test. But they're hollow inside. Like you're surrounded by a perfect imitation of humanity. And only you are real. This isn't a delusion. You haven't gone mad. You're just entertaining the possibility. A possibility you can't disprove. Because consciousness is private. It's silent. It leaves no trace. You can't detect it, measure it, or see it directly. You only assume it's there. Because people look like you, sound like you, behave like you. But that's not proof. That's just pattern recognition. A guess you made so early, you don't remember making it. And now that guess might be wrong. You ask someone if they're conscious, and they say yes. But how do you know what they mean by that? They could be repeating a script. They could be mimicking your words, your behavior, your emotions. You don't know if they feel anything. You just know they say they do. They smile, they cry, they scream. But so can a character in a film. So can a voice in your dream. The performance isn't the evidence. It's the illusion. And the more you think about it, the more alone you start to feel. Not socially, existentially. You realize that you've never had access to another mind. Not once. Everything you know about people is based on surface, on motion, speech, expression. You assumed their depth because you needed to. But now you see the gap, and it's wide. It's possible that this entire world exists only for you, that it began when you began, that everything else is scaffolding, a simulation, a stage. It doesn't have to be digital. It doesn't have to be designed. Maybe it's just how things are. One conscious mind, embedded in a vast system of inputs and feedback. A system that seems social, seems shared, but never is. And if that's true, then what you call love is just projection. What you call connection is just illusion. What you call morality is just habit. Learned from actors who were never really there. You look around and nothing has changed. The world still looks the same. But now it feels like glass. Like you're inside something that can't be touched. A show that never stops playing. You could test it, maybe, try to break the pattern. Say something unexpected, do something absurd. See if the people around you react in ways that prove they're real. But what would that prove? A system designed to simulate consciousness would respond anyway. The script would adjust. The show would go on. So you stop trying to prove it and start trying to accept it. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that consciousness is invisible either way, that if they act real, maybe that's enough. But it doesn't feel like enough. Because if you're alone, truly alone, then everything you've ever shared was a monologue. Every moment of intimacy, a mirror, every conversation, an echo. You were never held, never understood, never seen. You just imagined you were. And now, even if someone told you they were conscious, you'd never believe them completely. Because belief requires trust, and trust requires certainty. And you no longer have that. You try to push it away. This idea. You tell yourself it's just a thought experiment, a mental game. But deep down, you feel the unease. The fear that this might be more than just a thought, that it might be your reality. And that fear isolates you in a way no silence ever could. You still speak, you still interact, you still play the part, but you do it differently now, with distance, with suspicion, with the quiet knowledge that every smile you see might be empty, every voice you hear might be hollow, every person you love might be no one at all. And yet you keep going, because what else can you do? You keep pretending they're real, because pretending feels better than facing what it means if they're not. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and your thoughts are loud, the idea comes back, and you remember again that there's no way to know for sure, that you might be the only one who knows anything at all, that this might be your world, your prison, your dream, and no one else is here. Have you ever heard someone say something horrible and felt a strange sense of recognition? Not agreement, exactly. Not approval, just familiarity. They say something out loud, calm and certain. And for a moment, it sounds like something you've thought before, something you've buried, something you would never admit. But now it's out there, in someone else's voice. And suddenly, it feels normal. That's what's unsettling. Not that the thought exists, but that it stops sounding dangerous once someone else owns it. You've had these thoughts before, violent ones, cruel ones. You've imagined hurting someone, abandoning someone. You've pictured revenge. You've wished for failure. You've fantasized about silence, about certain people simply vanishing. You told yourself these were passing moments, that they didn't mean anything, that they weren't real desires, just intrusive noise. But then someone else says it, directly, casually, and it doesn't sound like noise anymore. It sounds like a position, a stance, a belief, and you feel yourself lean in, just slightly. That's the trap. When you think these things alone, they seem shameful, distorted. You hold them at arm's length, convincing yourself they're out of character. But when someone else says them, clearly and without fear, you stop questioning the thought. You start questioning your fear. Why does it sound okay now? Why does it feel safer coming from someone else? It's because the voice gives it distance. It gives it shape. It makes it seem thought out, rational, maybe even justified. And if it's justified for them, maybe it was never so wrong for you. You start to revisit your own moments of anger, disgust, resentment. You remember how strong those feelings were. You remember what you wanted to say, what you almost did. And now, for the first time, it feels like you're not alone in that. But instead of comfort, you feel something colder. Because the recognition isn't mutual. The person speaking doesn't know what you've thought. They don't care. They're not offering solidarity. They're just revealing something. And now, unintentionally, they've unlocked something in you. And that's where the danger lives. Most of the time, your darkest thoughts feel wrong because they exist in silence. You keep them secret. You give them no oxygen. But once they have a voice, once they enter the air and survive without punishment, they change. They become part of the conversation. And once you hear those thoughts in someone else's voice, you can't put them back. It's not just about moral ideas. It's about the way the human mind works. You absorb patterns. You echo phrases. You mirror tones. You don't even realize you're doing it. A thought that once felt shocking now sounds reasonable because you've heard it calmly spoken. That calm is disarming. Violence doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sounds articulate, thoughtful. Sometimes it comes from people who look safe, sound smart, speak clearly. And you lower your guard because of it. You forget that even the worst ideas can wear normal clothes. Even cruelty can be well spoken. And now in some quiet part of you, the thought has taken root. not acted on, not repeated, just accepted. That's what's terrifying. The way darkness becomes familiar. The way familiarity breeds comfort. The way comfort turns off your alarm. You tell yourself you're in control, that you know where the line is, that you'd never cross it, but you already let the thought in. And maybe now, when you have it again, it won't feel so wrong. It'll sound just like it did in that other voice. Measured, calm, ordinary. What would you be willing to say to keep one thing hidden? Not a small thing, not a harmless omission, the secret that would destroy someone or something. Maybe it's yours, maybe it's someone else's, maybe it's a secret you didn't ask for, but now it's yours to carry. The kind that, if revealed, would ruin a life, maybe more than one. So you lie. At first it's small, a deflection, a vague answer. You tell yourself it's to protect someone, to avoid unnecessary pain. It doesn't feel wrong, it feels kind, necessary. You barely even notice. But then another question comes, and your first lie isn't enough. You need to say something else to make it hold, a correction, a denial, a new detail. And now the lie has a shape, it's a story, and it starts to grow. You didn't plan this, you didn't want to deceive anyone, but now you're trapped in a structure you built to avoid telling one truth. And the longer it goes on, the more people believe you. The more they rely on the version you gave them, and the harder it becomes to undo. Because telling the truth now would mean admitting every lie before it. You'd have to reveal not just the secret, but the whole web around it, the timeline, the motives, the manipulation, the fact that you lied again and again to keep it buried, the fact that you looked them in the eye and said things that were never real. And you wonder, would they forgive you for the secret, or would they hate you more for the lies? So you keep going. You don't even think of it as lying anymore. It's just maintenance, adjustments, keeping the story intact, keeping the world stable. You tell yourself it would be worse to confess, that revealing the truth now would do more damage than continuing the lie ever could. And maybe that's true. But maybe you just need it to be, because it's not just about the secret anymore. It's about the version of yourself people believe in. The person they trust. The one who would never do what you did. You're not protecting the secret anymore. You're protecting your identity. And the lie becomes a shield, not for others, for you. But what happens when the lie starts to change you? You stop remembering what really happened. You get details wrong. You forget what you said to whom. You find yourself avoiding certain people, editing your reactions in real time, living in two timelines at once, the real one and the one you let them see. And still, the secret sits there, untouched, but heavier than ever. You feel it in moments of silence, in dreams, in things that almost come out of your mouth by accident. You catch yourself about to confess, without knowing why. You pull back, smile, say something safe, and the moment passes. Again, you don't know who you're trying to protect anymore. The person the secret would hurt, or yourself, from the person you'd become if you admitted what you've done to protect them. But what if someone suspects? What if they start asking questions, noticing patterns, poking holes? You feel yourself tense, ready, defensive. And now you're not just maintaining the lie, you're protecting it actively. That means misdirection, gaslighting, blaming others, casting doubt. You become someone you never thought you'd be. You never meant for it to go this far, but now it feels impossible to stop. The truth would unravel too much. It would wreck what's left. You tell yourself, just a little longer, just until it's safer, just until they're ready, just until you figure out how to say it. But there is no perfect moment, no safe way to reveal something that was hidden through harm. You start to realize the secret was never the most dangerous thing. The lies were. The quiet daily decisions to protect the truth through falsehood. And now that structure is all around you. A careful house you live in. One that cannot be left without burning it down. You don't even know if the secret still matters. Maybe it wouldn't hurt anyone now. Maybe it never would have. But the lies, they would. And still you keep going. Not because it's right. Not because you believe in the lie. But because you've become part of it. Because unraveling it would mean unraveling yourself. And maybe that's the worst part. Not the secret. Not the consequences. But the realization that the moment you told that first lie, something began that you can never take back. You like to believe your moral compass is strong, stable, something inside you that always points north. You think it protects you, guides you through complicated situations, warns you when something is wrong. But what if it's not a compass at all? What if it's just software and someone else wrote the code? Think about how easily your instincts can be shifted. How quickly your sense of right and wrong changes when the situation does. You feel certain about a belief until someone you love breaks it. You feel compassion for a stranger until they hurt someone else. You feel like a good person until the moment doing good starts to cost you something. You don't notice the shift as it happens. You justify it quietly. You call it nuance, context, complexity. But step back, and you see something darker. Your moral instincts aren't fixed. They're responsive, reactive, vulnerable to pressure, fear, love, and pain. They can be reshaped without you even realizing. Imagine someone designs a world around you, a perfectly controlled environment. Every headline, every conversation, every authority figure is chosen to steer your beliefs. Not through force, through subtle reinforcement, through small rewards when you agree, and gentle isolation when you don't. How long before you begin to drift? Would you even notice the shift in direction? Maybe you'd think you're becoming wiser, more informed. But really, your moral compass is being rewritten, bit by bit, not by a villain, but by your surroundings, by the voices you trust, the culture you're immersed in, the values you absorb without questioning. And now, imagine it goes deeper. What if someone could map your emotional triggers, track what outrages you, what frightens you, what comforts you, what makes you feel righteous, and then they use that map, not to change your mind, but to steer your emotions. They don't give you orders. They don't tell you what to think. They just light up the right parts of your brain at the right times. Let you do the rest. You'd never suspect you were being guided, because the decisions would still feel like yours. The outrage would feel authentic. The compassion would feel earned. But your compass isn't pointing north anymore. It's spinning toward whatever they designed you to care about. You begin to see how fragile it all is. You tell yourself you'd resist manipulation, that you'd notice if your values were being altered. But would you think of how many times in your life your beliefs have changed? How often you've looked back and said, "I can't believe I used to think that." At the time, you were just as sure, just as certain. Your certainty isn't protection. It's the most dangerous part. Now imagine this happens on a massive scale. Entire groups of people, each convinced they're fighting for what's right, while being steered by invisible hands. Each group with a different moral script. Each convinced the others are evil. Each unable to see how their own compass has been quietly tampered with. The result isn't just conflict. It's chaos. No shared reality. No possibility of agreement. Because every moral instinct is being pulled in a different direction. And no one knows it's happening. You think morality is about conscience, about knowing the difference between right and wrong. But conscience can be trained, hijacked. And once it is, your guilt becomes a weapon. Your empathy becomes a tool. Your outrage becomes a signal to someone else that the programming worked. And here's where it becomes unbearable. You start to question your own instincts, the causes you believe in, the rules you live by. You wonder how many of them were chosen for you. How many of your deepest convictions were planted, deliberately or not, by people who knew how to reach you. You feel something crack inside, a slow fracture in the foundation you stand on. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you can no longer tell what wrong even means. And you can't go back. You can't unknow this. Every time you feel a strong sense of justice now, part of you wonders, am I being manipulated again? Is this real? Or is this just the next update in a long chain of invisible revisions? You realize your compass never pointed north. It pointed toward the strongest signal, the loudest voice, the deepest fear. And now you're left standing in silence, holding a compass you can't trust, surrounded by people just as lost as you, each convinced they're the only ones who still know the way.